Welcome everyone to the VEF Virtual Series. For those who are joining for the first time, the VEF Virtual Series, guided by the theme Accelerating the Energy Transition, is a sequence of online consultations that explore the pathways that stimulate demand and promote economic recovery in 3 end-use sectors. So this is the 7th session of our food systems track, and we will be covering investment and partnership needs. Now, to begin with today's program, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Magdalena Kouneva. She is the Director General of the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership. So we are letting her in the platform. Hello, Magdalena.
Hello, hi, hello. Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today at this 7th session of the Vienna Energy Forum digital series that UNIDO is organizing together with its partners in the Vienna Energy Forum, RIP including being one of the partners. I just want to make a few introduction remarks and start with what I'm sure it's on everybody's mind, and it is the impact of the COVID crisis around the world. I want to also say that even before the coronavirus hit our societies, we were really not on track to achieve all the targets for SDG 7, for clean energy for all and affordable and clean energy, and also SDG 13 on climate action. And with the rising populations, the demand specifically on food systems increasing, and these demands are expected to increase by 50% by 2030, which really emphasizes the role of sustainable energy across the entire food systems value chains. Sustainable energy has a role in crop production, in processing, in circularity. However, as we know, especially the countries which are at the forefront of climate change, they face significant gaps, especially climate adaptation funding. The gaps, for instance, for Africa, are estimated to be between 7 to 15 billion annually, and only a fraction of this funding is available. There are significant issues. These issues are not new. They range from policy environment to transaction costs, which are linked to small project size barrier, to the lack of participation and green capacities in the local financial sector, to the high risks and the lack of innovative financial products and partnerships. But this is why we're here today. We're here today to discuss some of these challenges, but also to look at the opportunities. As RIP, the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership, which is a multilateral, multi-stakeholder partnership, we have been around for 20 years. Coming out of the Johannesburg Sustainability Forum in 2002, we have implemented programs across 10 global goals in more than 56 countries, more than 200 projects, and currently we co-host and implement impactful programs for energy access to Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa in 5 markets in Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Private Finance Advisory Network, which is a project preparation facility for clean energy and climate adaptation businesses, as well as innovative financial instruments through local financial institutions. And what we see is a significant opportunity. And the opportunity is due to the falling costs of technologies. It is due to innovations in business models such as pay-as-you-go systems. However, to utilize these opportunities, private finance needs to be catalyzed on country level, and the global climate financing system really needs to reorient and support more countries' climate finance facilities, because they're in a better position to mobilize and direct investment to the sectors and to the market segments where they're most needed. And this is the scope of our scene-setting presentation. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce to you RIP's head of financial instrument, Julian Van Voorst, who would speak to us about the experiences with financial instrument and crowding in more investment and greening local financial systems. Afterwards, we'll have time for breakaway sessions. We have experienced moderators for 3 breakaway sessions, and we also expect another plenary where we can discuss some of these takeaways. Julian, over to you.
Thank you. So, a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you, Madalena, for the introduction. I'll be sharing my screen for a quick slide presentation. I hope you all see it. So it's a pleasure to be setting the scene for the investment and partnership needs, accelerating energy transition for food system transformation. So the topic, accelerating energy transition for food system transformation, takes a close look of the role of energy in supporting the development of sustainable food system that is much needed. As discussed in past sessions of the VEF Virtual Series, sustainable energy in food systems has the opportunity to improve production, storage and handling, processing, and also the use of bioenergy from potential food waste. Some of the examples of applications are solar irrigation, greenhouse heating, poultry incubation, cold chains, energy efficiency alternatives, and also machinery. In past sessions, they have also highlighted a couple of constraints to sustainable energy development, such as unsupportive policy environment, lack of technical capacity locally to develop, adapt, and maintain energy technology. Also, the lack of awareness of the potential of sustainable energy and benefits, and the topic that we are covering today, financial barriers, not only to the project developer, but also to the end users, and also the lack of risk mitigation and risk sharing instruments for investors, addressing both credit and climate risks. So we will be discussing what forms of investments are required, considering aspects that need external investment, potential sources of funds, partnerships needed, and the ideal balance of public and private funding to unlock and maximize private investment. So financing the clean energy value chain in developing markets has its challenges, of course, but also has opportunities. Some are the mismatch between supply and demand of capital. There is significant supply. However, the demand from projects that are not ready to receive investment or do not present an appropriate risk-return proposition is an opportunity to receive more attention. In addition, most funding is still committed in hard currency, while most enterprises have their revenues in local currency, and FX volatility is and can be extremely high in emerging markets. The lack of participation of local financial institutions is a challenge, but presents itself as an opportunity to unlock local financial instruments and scale rapid penetration into the sector. Limited deployment of financial instruments such as complex guarantee schemes, untapped concessional credit lines is always there. And there is opportunity to put more effort into unlocking those financial instruments. High risks and small size of projects is also an issue. So aggregation, local presence, penetration can be mitigants for that issue. Limited public funding, of course, is there, and the need to adjust risk returns to accelerate and unlock private capital is the way to go. Common barriers for adoption of productive use technologies are the usual: high investment for capital expenditures, lack of suitable financing mechanism, viability of business models, or the ability to monetize on the energy transition and the new technology. Off-grid electricity are also not affordable if cost-effective due to high capex and opex and low population density in rural areas especially. And of course, delayed formulation of policy and regulatory framework is also a barrier. Having all this in mind, REAP has a vision, a coordinated approach across the value chain, the financing value chain, the clean energy value chain, and the food system value chain. REAP is committed to support the development of green banking local capacities to enable countries to raise climate finance and deploy according to their own priorities, risk mitigation, risk sharing, and co-investment to both support local financial institutions to lend to the sector and attract additional private investments. The aim is to unlock financing from and via local financial institutions and international lenders with green banking tools, such as green banking capacity building, understanding the clean energy, productive use, food sector. In local currency, for those who don't have, should have access to exchange rate hedging alternatives, for example. And the market acceleration of clean energy and productive use technology and service providers is done with specialized technical assistance for pipeline origination, preparation, and development, which should include results-based finance programs and direct early investment to de-risk and increase financial resilience of this enterprise so they are ready to attract commercial lending. Partnerships are key for productive use, implementation support across the food system value chain, ensuring maximization of impact of existing programs and penetration of microfinance institutions in the sector. This is the ecosystem that could make all programs more effective. One example of results-based finance is the BGFA program, a 70 million energy access program, results-based, started in Zambia, expanding into Burkina Faso, Liberia, Mozambique, Zambia, and Uganda. An example of credit enhancement and support to local financial institutions is what REAP is doing in Nepal, Tanzania, and Zambia, supporting local financial institutions to lend to the sector via credit enhancement and combined with green banking capacity building and product design, looking at ways to mitigate risks, to share risks, and technical assistance to support the pipeline origination and preparation. An example of data and intelligence in the sector to measure and understand risks, monitor impact, is also the Edison platform that manages data collection, storage, and access for the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, and could be used also to support financial instruments design. An example of technical assistance to clean energy and climate adaptation projects is the PFAN program, as Magdalena already mentioned, existing in 6 regions and jointly hosted by UNIDO and REAP. So to keep in mind before we break into our groups with the experts, we would like to raise your attention to the role of the different financing sources and blending, such as public funding, private investment, commercial lending. How to ensure funding continuum from grants to early equity, growth capital, and into commercial lending. How to ensure the risk-return proposition enables and attracts private investments where there are risks, mitigation, sharing, data intelligence, measurement should be considered. Where cash flows are not enough for returns, incentives linked to impact could be considered. And of course, a sustainable food value chain should be profitable, should have benefits to society, should have positive or neutral impact to the environment. The energy transition should be across the food systems, increasing productivity, reducing losses and footprint, and improving livelihoods. The case for small-scale agriculture to support food security is especially important to Asia and Africa, and both regions have a great potential to increase productive yields. creating shared value at the bottom of the pyramid should be a goal, such as linking future corporate profits with engagement with the next or last mile smallholder farmers, for example. And last but not the least, the case for local currency financing. Volatile currencies in sub-Saharan Africa are presented here as an example in their cumulative depreciation in the past years. This is evidence of the negative impact on the financial resilience of enterprises that have hard currency lending while they have local currency revenues. Thank you, and I wish you all a productive discussion.
Thank you, Julian, for this great presentation. It's a really good introduction and also good guidance. So I hope everybody kept note of the last slide that you showed us. Thank you so much. So now I would like to welcome everyone to our breakout room discussions. We have three, as Magdalena told us. There is Global Perspectives, moderated by Juliette Besnard from the World Bank, with representatives from EarthSpark, SNV, Energrow, and the Green Climate Fund. Country Voices, moderated by Olivier Dubois from FAO, with representatives from ANCA Madagascar, GIZ, the Rocky Mountain Institute, and REAP. And Enablers for Progress, moderated by Pasi Amayo from the Society for International Development, with representatives from the Shell Foundation, Sun Funder, Duke University, and the Alliance for Rural Electrification. So you may access all of these by clicking on the series button to the left. To our speakers, please enter your assigned breakout room. And to our participant, please feel free to virtually walk around our rooms and select the one you're most interested in. Remember to use the comment section to the right of your screen to ask questions and interact with the panel. So thank you for joining, and I wish you all great discussions.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the breakout session on global perspectives. I'm very happy to moderate this session today. I'm Juliette Besnard, energy specialist at SMAP, World Bank, working on electricity access and productive uses of electricity. So the discussion today will be articulated around three key questions. Hi, Alison, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
I was just introducing the session. You didn't miss anything. So yeah, three quick key questions for this session. What partnerships are required to source and manage investment for food system transformation by sourcing renewable energy? What is the ideal balance of public and private sector finance? And the third one is about what scale-up plans and activities are required to attract investors. So with no further ado, I would like to briefly introduce our panelists today who kindly accepted the invitation. Alison Archambault is the president of EarthSpark International. EarthSpark builds solar-powered electricity grids that energize homes and power local industry. Alison co-founded and now serves as on the board of Smart Meter, which is a provider of smart meters and grid management tools. Alison, welcome. Albert Bokestein, he's a project manager at SNV in the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, responsible for the graduating innovative ideas into bankable business investment projects that target climate resilience. Albert has 30 years of working experience in the development sector and has engaged in projects focused on sustainable forest management, agriculture, renewable energy, and climate action. Aaron Leopold, he's the CEO of Energrow, a company in Africa dedicated to being the load growth and productive use partner of mini-grid and on-grid energy companies. And before coming to Energrow, Aaron was the founding CEO of the AMDA, the Africa Mini-Grid Developer Association. So welcome. Dimitrio Innocenti is not connected. I mean, I don't see. Dimitrio, are you here? Perhaps you cannot just turn on your video. Well, so perhaps, hopefully we'll be able to join a bit later. But welcome to all of you. If I miss anything while introducing you, please feel free to add when you start speaking. And well, I would suggest to get started with the first question about partnerships. So what partnerships are required to source investment for food system transformation by sourcing renewable energy? So feel free to illustrate your ideas also with examples of projects or countries where those partnerships have worked. Perhaps Alison, would you like to start?
I'd be happy to. Somebody else is joining us for a moment, sorry. But I'd be happy to talk to this, and I'm this topic on the agenda. We built our first mini grid in 2015 with the premise of having agricultural uses as a key sort of driver, both of the funding source, which was USAID at the time, and as one of the key outputs. One of our premises is that we need smart meters to be able to make the demand. You know, we always thought like on market day when agricultural processing is going to be at peak, that's when we use demand response to tone back the consumption on the other customers. So in a way that makes everybody's consumption more cost effective and is a smart utilization of the overall mini grid assets. That in practice has turned out to be much more challenging than we thought it would be back in 2012 when we were getting started. I'm super excited to see Aaron's company. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the effort that he's launching. But the kind of partnerships that are necessary are these, like USAID funded our work to build this mini grid and to work on electric milling, we really need to see these as overlapping issues and fund the trials in the field, in the sector where the two overlap. I think, you know, that's my thesis on this first topic, and I'm really excited to hear what everybody else is going to say.
Thanks a lot, Alison. I see that Dimitrio joined. Welcome, Dimitrio. I'm glad you're here. So perhaps on this first question on partnership, Aaron, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Juliette. And thanks, Alison. I'm really excited about this too. It's great to see you and your family, albeit virtually. I think the question that we're talking about here is fundamental to the future of energy, right? So in Africa in particular, but around the world, a mature energy sector is a specialized energy sector. And what Alison was talking about with EarthSpark and Spark Meter is precisely a symptom of the fact that to date, we still have very, very little specialized service providers in the energy sector. So there were no smart metering companies that provided good smart meters, so they had to make their own. There were no off-grid energy companies, so they had to make their own. With Energrow, the issue is much more profound at this point, because we have sort of settled, we've sort of sorted out the supply side of the equation in the energy sector. So solar is now the cheapest in the world. China has dropped the price of manufacturing to an unbelievably affordable level. We have qualified engineers all across Africa and Asia and Latin America. So on the technology side, we have things more or less figured out. But on the demand side, on the customer side, that is the black box. One of the points that the keynote speaker made at the beginning was, well, we have a mismatch between bankable projects and companies' ability to deliver. But I don't think that's really true. I think any of these companies could deliver in a city, or they could deliver in a Western economy, not necessarily because the customers have more money, but it's more because the investors understand those customers, and therefore the investors understand the business better than they understand a rural mini grid in Africa or Haiti or wherever. It's not the companies that are not trustworthy, it's the customers of those companies that are unknowns. And Energrow, the company that just last week I started at as the scale-up CEO. Energrow has been working for about a year and a half doing pilots around asset financing for productive use technologies. So the only thing that we sell are things that can help people earn an income. So welding machines, carpentry equipment, food processing equipment, juicing machines, pressure cookers, etc. And we provide training to these folks to basically take an asset, earn money with it, at the same time increase their energy consumption. So I'm literally at 40 years old now a refrigerator salesman, which I never thought was going to be the case. But we are the partner that does not exist for energy companies across Africa. And in the United States and in Europe, General Electric or the National Grid or whatever company you might want to name was forced at that time in the early 20th century to sell washing machines and hair dryers and clothes dryers because there was not demand in rural England or the rural United States. So it really is this market segmentation and the specialization that I think we need in terms of partnerships. But I think I've already spoken too much. I'll let the other panelists have it.
Thanks a lot, Aaron, for your insights. Albert, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you as well for the opportunity. I feel that I'm a very good company here with people that already also know from experience the business and the investments they make in renewable energy for food system transformation. And I like to talk a bit at partnerships that identify good business ideas, make them investable, which I will refer to as origination, and also co-invest in them. And it's also linked to what's already presented in the plenary. And I like to take the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development as an example, the DFCD. The DFCD is a €160 million fund financed by the Dutch government that aims at leveraging private investments in climate action and resilient sustainable development. And we have a partnerships of 4 organizations. First of all, a bank, the FMO, the Dutch Entrepreneurial Development Bank, CFM, an investor, Climate Fund Managers, the World Wildlife Fund, WWF Netherlands, and S&V, Netherlands Development Organizations. And this alliance harbors a wealth of international expertise in finance, banking, inclusive development, and conservation. And we like to construct and invest in a pipeline of high quality bankable projects that contribute to development impact in climate vulnerable communities, deepen resilient economic growth, and enhance the adaptation and mitigation efforts in developing countries. And one important aspect of the partnership is the capacity to develop and de-risk and catalyze these innovative ideas and put them into scale. That's also some important, especially in countries that present medium-high risks context for investors. And for this origination process, we as SNV, we pull together a variety of resources, be it business, financial science, public and civil society, really to graduate and mature a proposal. And that we are doing by means of technical assistance and non-reimbursable origination capital that we will make accessible to the company or the sponsors of a business idea. Another important aspect, which I already mentioned as well, is that what's also said, investing in developing countries, investing in a sector might provide a high risk, and it's very important that this partnership also can take and bear the high risk part of the capital that's needed to be invested. So the DFCD also provides in this, and I think this is really an attractive combination for origination and investment. Yeah. Like just to mention quickly two business examples that we're currently supporting, one in Mali and one in Indonesia. In Mali, we currently around Bamako, we are developing a investment plan for a fecal sludge and industrial waste treatment plant that generates electricity, biogas, briquettes and pellets for cook stoves, irrigation water and biofertilizer. We are currently developing that with €500,000, of which half of the €500,000, of which half is coming from the DFCD. And the high risk investments, which is done, will be foreseen through equity, is about €10 million. Yeah? And we hope that also people in and around Bamako will be the beneficiaries. And it's about 340,000 people that are targeted. In Indonesia, we are in South Sulawesi. We are in seaweed farming for the production of food, biofertilizer, and biofuels with farmer cooperatives. And during the origination, we test and develop this project with farmer cooperatives by using already developed pot technology. Yeah. Here again, the equity investments that will be, if the investment plan is developed, will be roughly around 5 million out of a total investment that is needed about 10 million. Yeah. And as a last point on partnerships on this issue is, I think also what I explained, we have 4 organizations, each with a different mandate, being conservation, being a bank, an investor, but also a development organization like SNV. And we also have acknowledged the need to communicate effectively between each other, because everybody is talking its own buzzwords, and that sometimes is even very difficult. Yeah, and I can still recall that the first month I was working within the DFCD, not being from the banking sector, I was just flabbergasted by all the buzzwords that were used in the financial world. But it also made clear to us that as SNV, we also, despite this, we also should improve on our own capacity in working with the banking and finance sector. So within our team, we also involved staff that is coming from the banking sector, while also maintaining our technical staff that we have in the several countries. Yeah, and that really looking for this language, and also FMOs, the bank and the investors that understand more the development issues, the need to work with local companies, local stakeholders, the last mile farmers. That's really important, and that's for us that we add to this partnership as well. So partnerships, great partnerships also need to be invested in as to mature as well. And we hope to do so as DFCD, and we're currently in the first phase up till 2022, hopefully up to 2023, and already busy and looking for other opportunities to for investments in the funds in order to grow over time as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Albert. Let's move on to the second question on the balance and the ideal balance of public and private sector finance. And what are the challenges that must be overcome to link public and private sector finance, and how to address them. Demetrio?
Hello?
Yeah. Hi,
lost
Aaron.
you, or have we lost our moderator?
Oh yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Demetrio, would you like to start?
Thank you, Juliet. And Yeah, let me start with an apologies. I was probably tricked by some type of technological problem with the invite that appeared 1 hour from now in my calendar. Maybe there was a little bit of a problem, so apologies for be a little
no
bit.
worries. If you can also introduce yourself, because I didn't do it.
Thank you, Juliette. And so my name is Demetrio Innocenti, and I'm working for the Green Climate Fund. As I suppose some of you, or many of you might know, the Green Climate Fund is currently one of the financial mechanisms under the UN Convention on Climate Change, and is the largest devoted fund, the multilateral fund to climate change. We are currently finished last year the first replenishment phase of the fund that follow the initial resource mobilization. So our total capitalization exceeded 20 billions. And indeed, energy, as you can imagine, private sector, it's one of the main area of the investments for the fund. And my role in the fund is to manage an access window that is called the simplified approval process, as well as the project preparation facility, which is indeed a facility that is managed directly by us at the Secretariat, that provide resources to the organization that can bring projects to the fund in order to support financially their preparation. And yeah, Juliette, over to you. And I think I've heard your question, but over to you after my introduction.
So thanks, Demetrio. So the question is on balancing and linking public and private sector finance. Would you like to go first, or yeah?
Well, yes, I can go first. Maybe I would not approach that in terms of finding a specific ratio in this balance between public and private sector finance when we want to, let's say, support a pipeline of projects that deal with the energy sector, energy access, renewable energy, and in general, I would say even whatever climate change action, even including adaptation. And as I would see it, the important is to understand how public finance and private sector finance can work actually together in a way that is meaningful to unlock more resources for climate actions. And I would say that, in fact, if you take the Green Climate Fund, the institution where I work with, one of the raison d'etre why the GCF was actually established was, in fact, that with the finance that we can provide, we can indeed unlock private sector finance. Meaning what private sector needs, it's often to de-risk investments. So often if you look at many projects that the GCF has financed, is financing in the energy sector, but not only in the energy sector, is working with a set of organizations which span from hedge fund, from impact funds like Acumen, for example. It's one of the impact funds. We have worked quite a lot to multilateral development banks or to directly commercial banks, where the GCF enter as the investor that can take the first loss, and doing this allow other institutional investors to actually unlock their financing because we take the risk that allow them to enter into the deal. And so the role of public versus private can also be seen in terms of allowing the flow of private sector finance to jump in those projects, in those countries where the risk of private investor is perceived as too much, or where institutional investor can simply not enter if there is no someone like the Green Climate Fund, the risk in these investments. Other things that, for example, us as funded by public donor, we can do is to provide technical assistance in the form of grants, which sometimes is more difficult for, let's say, private investors. And of course, this is part of the de-risking projects guarantees. Or we can, in general, support that type of public goods that allow the creation of the market creation that it's composed by supporting policies, supporting reforms, all the type of actions that normally are needed before a private sector investors feel in a position to enter into a climate investments, energy included. I would stop here actually, and maybe if you have some follow-up questions or some of the colleagues wants to build upon what I said, I can continue. Over to you, Juliette.
Thank you, Demetrio. I have on this question about the ideal balance of public and private sector finance and the challenges.
Yeah, I mean, we've been grappling with this since we were born as an institution. We're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is solving energy poverty, but our method is to do research and development on business models that we can build and spin off and scale. And so we are a happy recipient of Green Climate Fund funding. We are in the SAP program. Thank you, Demetrio and team. We exist in this world where we have to constantly, we talk about what we do in three phrases, basically: de-risking by, or proving what is possible. So this is really research and development that people think are crazy. And then once you do them, then people start to think that they're possible. So proving what is possible is really important. Really, when we were trying to talk about solar, microgrids, and smart meters back in 2010, honestly, everybody laughed at us. And so, just building those things and proving them out is incredibly important. So proving what is possible, that's research and development. De-risking by doing, and this is getting more into the blended part. That's just going out and building the project. Don't write a paper about building the project, build the project. And that's how you figure out what's going to go wrong. And that's how sector data that can unlock the big institutional incentive programs. The World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank funding for Haiti for the microgrid sector references our little nonprofit's work 13 times in their big SREP documents. So, again, little groups that are trying to really push forward with grant funding. This is the space where grant funding makes sense. Then the third thing that we talk about that we do is move microgrids towards market. And a lot of times when I'm talking about microgrids, I have people come and say, when are you going to stop needing subsidies? And I challenge them well, I don't know, where are you sitting in the world right now and who's subsidizing your electricity? Because there's always some subsidy in electricity sectors that serve populations. And so, I think we collectively as a sector in the energy access world are getting better at making sure that we're not afraid to say that we need subsidy. We just say, of course, everybody needs subsidy. But figuring out, we're constantly being asked how are you going to crowd in more private sector investment? How are you going to need less grants? I mean, we've structured ourselves to have our nonprofit R&D side always need grants, because now we're really going deep on the electrification of cooking in a way that's very research and development focused. There are a lot of other things, specifically in the agricultural productive uses sector for Haiti, that we need to try out, frankly, to prove so that we can hopefully partner with Aaron and his company to bring in sort of tried and true application finance. So it's this spectrum, and I feel because I run a nonprofit and I launch businesses and I'm working on scale up funding in the blended finance world, I would think that I would know the answer, but I don't. It's just this big cloudy space where you got to define what you're doing and then justify the mix. And not everybody sees it the same way, but I think it's important that we all talk honestly about how, you know, grant money can reward laziness. Like that's true. Like you could just say like, oh, it's really hard to work in Haiti. I need more money. I don't have any results to show, but I need more grant funding because I'm a good person. Like that's the bad side of grants, because you know we like the market to prove what you know what works. But sometimes things don't work, and sometimes things don't work because people aren't doing a good job, and sometimes things don't work because there are some reasons that the project was flawed, and sometimes they don't work, and that's a useful learning for the sector. So we need to try to just be nuanced with our talking and not just draw big boxes about this is grant funding, this is market, and then things are simple. I think that's obviously the nature of this conversation, but like it's messy. I don't have any sound bites for where things make sense. It's a whole basket of stuff, and as Aaron said, like we're doing all of the stuff at the same time. So like we're also pulling in the agricultural stuff and doing the cooking stuff, and we try to slice it out even within our own organization, so the grant streams and the funding streams all have their boxes, but same people are working on the same stuff, and that the same people and the same teams are working together on these different issues actually makes everything better because we get smarter faster. Anyway, that's a big, I don't know, is my my big soundbite. I don't know, it's complicated.
I quite agree with your vision overall. Albert, would you like to come in on this question?
Yeah, well, there's a tricky question and the ideal balance. That depends on the context and where and who you are, and that also probably says a little bit what Alison already addressed. I think here as well, we have to look a little bit where are the risks. There are good business ideas, but if you take good business ideas to countries like at least development countries, high-risk countries like maybe Mali or South Sudan, then you can't expect that private capital will bear all the investment. So there it's also important really to with public finance to at least to support to de-risk what could be already proven ideas elsewhere or innovative but still innovative ideas for a certain region. And also I've seen a question like, is it only for new projects? Now, we're also looking here then at already companies that are already mature, but they need as well to innovate. Doing business is also about innovation, constant innovation. So how do you go about it, and especially if you go to these countries or are you already in those countries, then there is need for some public finance, and that looking a little bit at the DFCD, and we have this origination facility with TA and grants, but we always for really also to prove those models, like was already mentioned, and lift them to scale, yeah, in order to really to arouse interest, and also going beyond what a lot of companies worked formerly on corporate social responsibility, now turning more to putting climate resilience and sustainable development at the heart of their core business. Yeah, but it's a risky endeavor, and there's some public finance and technical assistance could do some good, I would say. Yeah. And looking at the DFCD in the origination, we only put up in certain very high risk countries to 50 to 70% of the development costs will be provided by the DFCD for the origination, and also up to 50% of the investments through equity or loans. Yeah, but we also expect really that by doing so, and we're using funds right now made available by the Dutch government, that also will not only de-risk for the company the investment plan, but also attracts and mobilize others that are not really risk takers, but now see, hey, the high risk part is really covered. I can also invest in it. Yeah, and that is something that we already see happening, and also as an added value of using public finance. I like to leave that my answer.
Thank you, Albert.
Yeah.
Aaron, anything to add on the balance between public and private finance, or should we?
Yeah, no, I do. So this is not a complicated question in my view, to contrast Allison and Albert. You know, public financing is there to fill the gaps, but what we don't do often enough is zoom out far enough to see how many gaps there really are. So in the mini grid sector, we ask, you know, how do we, when does the company stop needing grants, as Allison said? But that's not the real question. The real question is, what are all of the reasons why a mini grid company in Africa or Haiti might not be able to be profitable over the course of 5 years? And then we don't just look at the business, we look at the quality of the roads and the number of hurricanes per year and all of the other things that EarthSpark has had to deal with in Haiti over its near decade of work, right? And when we have a complete picture of the market system, we will be able to have a complete picture of what is holding that company back. And I think too infrequently do we look at this holistic situation. And this is why for over a decade now, I've been working on rural electrification, and Energrow is the only company in all of Africa that has its specific focus on the demand side. We have no customer-facing energy service providers in Africa, and this is crazy. You know, supply must equal demand. Economics 101. And we have one company that is just a few people working on this entire issue, right? So we've been trying to squeeze dollars and cents out of energy companies working on rural electrification and food systems for quite some time, but we've rarely turned around and looked at the customer. And I think this is one systematic issue that all investors are facing. And I was on the private sector advisory group of the Green Climate Fund for 4 years, advising the board of the GCF on how they should be thinking about putting together programmatic funding to focus not only on mitigation, but on adaptation, because I told them, and this has not changed now either, that the truly vulnerable and marginalized that the GCF is most mandated to support are the least easy to serve with the amounts of big projects and big contracts that the GCF is working on, because their problems are very specific quite often. And the best thing that grant providers, public funding providers, in my view, can do is to work with someone whose job it is to demystify the small things. Because what big investors, what also like the Dutch fund that Albert was talking about, Power Africa, all of these big programs have really started. If you look at the beginning of Power Africa's first 3 years was giant transmission and distribution contracts. How are we going to get thousands of megawatts installed across Africa? And then very quickly, they realized that, oh, wait, it's not about megawatts. Africa's problem is transmission and distribution, because Africa is huge, communities are small, and it's really expensive to connect them. So then then Power Africa was focusing on solar home systems. Well, we don't need megawatts, we need millions of connections. But then we realized that all connections are not equal. A solar home system connection is not a productive use connection. We cannot have energized food systems with solar home systems. So then now we've pivoted toward mini grids. But then we realized that, oh, well, mini grids have to be commercially viable in their infrastructure. They're not SMEs. And so, you know, a very long time ago, people working in the sector could have told you sort of that we would end up here. But But the big players with big grants and the big private sector investors want big projects. And the challenge now is sort of like meeting in the middle. Who are the translators of the big needs that understand the small scale side of things? And that's, I think, sort of where grants come in. They have to come in to fill those gaps. But right now, you know, the GCF has billions of dollars of grants to spend. And, you know, Allison referenced the Scaling Renewable Energy Program of the SIFs, which I advised as well as a steering committee member for a number of years. And they've been very successful at approving things, but they haven't been very successful at getting money out the door. The SREP has over 90% of its funding committed and is dispersed less than 2 years ago to disperse less than 20%. So it has 70% of its committed funding sitting there doing nothing. In the mini-grid sector, Sustainable Energy for All and the African Mini-Grid Developers Association, which I ran for the past 3 years, partnered to figure out how much grant financing had been committed to the mini-grid sector versus how much has been dispersed. Over $2 billion has been committed to the mini-grid sector over the past 5 or 7 years. Only 13% of it has been dispersed. That means we have well over $1.5 billion of committed mini-grid money not doing anything at all. And it's because of this translation problem that I've been mentioning, that we're not looking holistically enough at what the problems are. Why is there a mismatch between the projects and the finance that we heard at the keynote, and what Albert mentioned before? Albert, I did love your speech, but when you said, you know, we're taking our money and we're attaching it to high impact projects that are, you know, focusing on the marginalized, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, if it were that easy, you know, I would just retire right now. But like, those projects are so hard to find. And those projects are so hard to find partially because of what I had just mentioned. And I think that, you know, again, I'm excited about this new role. So I will say, you know, having just started 4 days ago, I only took this role because I really feel like we need these connecting organizations like Energrow to work on these things that, you know, if these off-grid energy companies had viable customer bases that financiers understood, which is our job, you know, this would fundamentally change things, right? And so the grant funding should be plugging these gaps of like, what are the questions that if we answer them would fundamentally change things? And what Allison mentioned on cooking, right? So electric pressure cookers are something that almost every single household in the developing world would use, because everybody cooks rice, everybody cooks beans and lentils and really hard like arrowroot and cassava and things like this that have to be cooked for hours and hours and hours. But the problem is they are amazing because they consume a kilowatt of electricity per unit, but they are a nightmare because they consume a kilowatt hour per unit. So if you have a 50 kilowatt mini grid, which is an average size for a community of a couple hundred people, and everyone makes dinner at the same time, your mini grid overloads every single day, and your solution just turned into your biggest problem. So, you know, figuring out how to do things like designing the technologies, which is very easy, you know, pressure cookers that communicate with near field communications with one another to not all turn on at the exact same moment, but to rotate around. This is the kind of thing that grant funding should be supporting. The de-risking of capital, yes, that is also something that investors have to have. That's where public financing also plays a role, but it doesn't always have to play a role. I'm kind of sick of grant financing de-risking extremely wealthy investors when the grant capital should be de-risking the extremely cash-strapped companies that then can be de-risked in the eyes of the investors. Right now, the de-risking capital is a middleman between the investor and the company, but it would be much more justly spent if it was a de-risking instrument between the customer and the company. And therefore, the company sees the return that it needs, and the investor sees the return that it needs as well. But right now, I think we've sort of, again, like misfocused our attention on where public funding should go. And again, I've talked too much, so I'll.
Thanks a lot, Aaron, and others, Alison, Albert, Dimitri, feel free to react. I think we have about 5 minutes left. So let's move on to the last question on solutions and scale-up plans that are required to attract investors. I mean, we kind of already have a few answers from your ideas and messages, but perhaps Albert, would you like to go?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Aaron but I am also looking a little bit like, yes, I mean, we should not confuse public money with grant money, and it's because public finance support is much more. Yeah, we always want also with public finance rate of return. Yeah, so return on investments and etc. And even not only financial but also on the money that's used for climate change and sustainable development. And these challenges are huge. So we need to bring small projects and things that have proven on the smaller scale to be also scalable. Yeah. So if we can scale, and the scalable is not only going with a big company, but if we can scale good projects, then we can support this transformational change in the sector and also for sustainable development. If we can't do that, then there is a problem. So exactly therefore, we as the DFCD, we have this origination facility that really can support this process, because they're not ready-made proposals already there out in the field, especially not in most of the developing countries. So you really have to invest in them, yeah. And that I think is really now up to the challenge, that if we want to scale up, we have to look for the small projects, but really see if they are scalable and really make them and fine tune them so that they become scalable, and really that investors become more interested, because most of the interest of the investors are risk avoidance, and they really want only to do the big checks. Yeah, I know that. So we really now have to work on both, and that's also what I said with my already on the partnership. I think all the different actors should also understand, what do I need, but also what does the other need, and can we understand each other in this partnership? Because therefore, then investment will flow. If the investors in the private sector really sees possibilities in climate change action and in sustainable development and renewable energy, then I think these partnerships will work. And that's also a challenge for us as a development organization to really to communicate on that and really foster relationship, building trust in these partnerships. And I think that with that last remark, I think that's really vital for all partnerships. If they have to work, you have to invest time and to create trust as well. Otherwise, it will not work at all.
Thank you, Albert. Demetrio, on this question.
Yeah, thanks, Juliette, and it's very interesting discussion. Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Aaron. Look, I will be very brief. Scale up and attracting private sector or attracting investors. Well, yes, let's say maybe from the perspective of the GCF, scaling up, it's indeed one of the sub-criteria of our investment framework. So, and indeed, for example, Alison can also, from a Spark perspective and the GCF projects, which is a SAP that asks, in fact, to show that the SAP GCF finance is scaling up action. It's one of the requirements, and it's indeed what is happening in that project in Haiti. Scaling up means that it's a way to the risk somehow, because what it means to us is that you bring solutions that have proved to work. So somehow this means that you de-risk the investment, or you are supposed to do it, and how you do it. Well, we expect that indeed you invest in the evaluation of previous phase of the project, that there is actually serious evidence when you say I scale up. It's easy to say, but what it means that there is a study behind that proved to donors such as the GCF or the World Bank or whoever other private donors that intend to invest, that those solutions have worked based on evidence. At the same time, we also look at the potential to replicate, which is a little bit the same, the other side of the same coin. So with the GCF, we intend also to take risk of projects that use innovative approach, and that we can basically finance, for example, with an incubator or an accelerator type of approach, in order for them, even the GCF or others, come when they have proved to be work with more finance on our side, with a phase 2 or a phase 3, or a replication in another context that basically build on, again, the lessons that we have learned. So when we say scaling up, we should also understand what is behind this concept in terms of being evidence-based. So there is a certain attention, if you like, to the impact part that has to be understood, and how you bring the evidence of what works and what doesn't, in order not to reward failure, but instead to reward what is really working. Okay. And I stop here, mindful of the time.
Yeah, thanks, Demetrio. Alison, perhaps in 1 minute. We are running out of time already.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we need to know what works. The scale up, the smart meter is a fine example. You know, we needed it in Haiti. We built it in Haiti. We realized it was relevant to other parts of the world, and now it's in 25 countries. So that's an enabling technology that was de-risked and now has scaled. We need that kind of tried and true knowledge about crop drying, about crop storage, about all sorts of electric mills for all different sets of conditions. I mean, when I'm planting my garden, I can go to a database about plants and say I need something that's shade tolerant with rocky soil and native to my region, and I get the subset of what those plants are, and then I get the how to grow them, and then I get to where to procure them in seeds or in plants. I need that for my mini-grid sector. Maybe Energrow can work on that database. CLASP is doing that for some appliances. MEX is doing that for cooking. We need that kind of, okay, I have an agricultural town that has these crops that's a coastal condition in the tropics. Like, what are the plug and play stuff that's tried and true, and what's the power consumption, and what's the service, lifetime of this technology? That would be immensely helpful for us to be able to plug in new demand side stuff that we can rely on instead of having to experiment and prove everything out for the first time.
Thanks, Alison. Aaron, in 30 seconds. I'm very sorry, we're running out of time.
No, that's fine. I don't have much to say on this other than, scaling up is about partnerships oftentimes, and it is about the answers to all the other questions that we've already given. So I think, what we really need is not just partnerships on the commercial side, but we need partnerships on the financing side much more than we have seen as well. So, the ultimate scale up potential, taking what Demetrio and what Alison said, finding things that work and bringing in private capital. I think the ultimate sign of success is when pension funds get interested in whatever you're doing, because they're the most conservative capital in the world. They don't get involved unless everything is completely proven out. And what we should really be working on is sort of trying to get a broad sector, or a broad spectrum rather, of different financial and commercial actors into whatever it is that we're trying to scale, and understand what it is that they would need to see to get involved. I think that would be a fascinating exercise to undertake. And just on the last point about the different service providers, or as the catalog that Alison said, this is a huge problem across the continent. Nothing can be scaled in a place where logistics and operations and whatnot and regulations are not. We haven't touched on this at all, but a lot of the government and infrastructure side of things is really holding a lot of things back as well. And my previous role at AMDA one of our central focal points was on regulations, because you can have the perfect technology, you can have willing customers, but if the policies and regulations are not matched to the needs, nothing will move. And the off-grid energy sector, unfortunately, is still really, really struggling on this front. Half of the countries in Africa do not have off-grid energy policies or regulations. So investors don't even want to touch it. So I don't care how ready for scale your project is. If you're in the wrong country with the wrong policy or no policy at all, no one's going to touch you. So I'll leave it.
Thanks, Aaron. And so I'd like to thank our panelists today for their very insightful messages. I hope you found this session interesting. We're already quite late, so you can, if I'm not wrong, you can click on the series on the left side to join the plenary session again. Thanks everyone for joining this session.
So welcome to this breakout session about country voices. We're given a flavor of the issues and possible solutions by Juliana during the plenary. Let's move into some details now. As was said, we have people from RIP, GIZ, ANCA, and RIM. No, we miss the colleague from. We are missing Francis from RMI. Francis, are you there? What? Anyway. Okay, we can start maybe without Francis. I see we have 14 participants. Okay, while waiting that, there is. Francis, do you hear us? Hello? Yes. Okay, so we have all the panelists, and I'll be moderating.
Hi, everyone.
The topic of this breakout session is country voices, and we have panelists from RIP, GIZ, RMI, and the first question that the panelists will have to answer concerns, again, going a bit deeper into the barriers in different countries to investments in energy for productive use, and in this case, food chains. So who would like, we have more or less 17 minutes per question. So who would like to take the floor?
I'm happy to take a stab.
Okay.
So, hi everyone, Francis Elisha from the Rocky Mountain Institute. I am leading the Institute engagement in Sub-Saharan Africa, where we have a focus in 3 countries mainly, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Malawi, taking a look at how decentralized energy resources can support the food system and productive use more generally. So really happy to be on this panel today and happy to be among the VEF participant and speakers. To your point, Olivier, perhaps I can start by sharing what we are observing in Ethiopia, because that's an interesting case. Not only from a climate perspective, because it's one of the countries that's the most climate friendly, but also from an agricultural perspective, because the country does have a significant agricultural potential that is yet to be fully leveraged. And what for most of the rural communities is that there's a huge spectrum of opportunities, which I would even describe as low-hanging fruit, to seize productive use, which ranges from cereal grains, wheat, teff, maize, for instance, all the way to export products, coffee, obviously, but also horticulture, avocado, mango.
Maybe Francis, go straight to the point of the barriers.
I'm coming to it. In terms of barriers, what needs to happen in Ethiopia right now is a coordinated approach. And that goes through financing, obviously, to deploy mini-grid at scale, which the World Bank is taking a look at, but also an approach around testing productive use on some of those decentralized energy resources and raising awareness. The awareness is not yet there. The capacity building needs to happen, not only for the smallholder farmers or the processors, but also for the appliance suppliers, which is one of the big bottlenecks we observe on the market right now. Appliance suppliers lack capital in terms of working capital to be able to develop a reliable supply chain and are pretty heavily hit by the Forex issue, which is pretty recurring in Ethiopia. So at least those starting barriers. And then there's a barrier more around policy that can support funding for smallholder farmers to actually afford the appliances to engage into productive use. A quick example, a lot of microfinance institutions and a thriving microfinance ecosystem in Ethiopia, and yet very few lending products that are tailored towards productive use, even though the opportunity is there. And yet, all those institutions are already engaged into the agricultural space by providing loans for agricultural inputs. So building the capacity for them and setting up the regulatory framework to move from agricultural input into productive use. I'll stop there for now, but it does give a perspective of the different branches that are involved in the productive use landscape in Ethiopia.
Thank you. Very good introduction. Other ones might want to complement, add. Yes, Camila.
Yeah, this is Camille. Yeah, hi everyone, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here. Just very quickly, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Anka in Madagascar, and we're basically a private operator doing mini-grids powered by solar energy. We have other jobs, but I focus on that today. And in my opinion, I have a few comments on the barriers, as you may guess, as a private sector company. Basically, I think that there is a major lack of understanding of the needs of productive use or even of their nature. I think that we don't know much about what is actually needed in rural areas and in this overall sector, and that we need to conduct more surveys to better understand how is the market environment, what are the needs and the available financing tools or mechanisms being developed, and we should capitalize on that. But secondly, I think that there's also a problem in the development of projects that deliver energy services in favorable conditions for the development of productive use, and especially agricultural productive use. I think that when a project is built on a cross-sectoral approach, investors and financiers are not necessarily in the position to finance the entire project because their mandate is often either directed to one sector, which could be the energy sector, or another sector, which could be, in that case, agriculture. And thus, investors do not have the mandate to fund projects that rely on multiple sectoral impacts. And I've been facing that as a private sector seeking for financing to deploy projects. So I guess that we would probably need to raise awareness amongst investors to focus more on multi-sectoral approaches. And I have also another comment, because I've also been facing that in Madagascar, but not only. Fundings or investments are almost always directed towards the creation of new connections. Therefore, the number of connections plays a key role in the list of criteria. However, no distinction is made on the nature and the impact of the connection. Therefore, the projects that aim at many productive use are often misjudged or less targeted by the funding, because you have less productive use in terms of number connected to a microgrid, for instance, then you have households or residential customers. And I'd say that instead of being an obstacle, we could actually take this as a criterion for investments. And investment, could put productive use at the very core of the mandate. By productive use, I mean as much individual productive use as overall agricultural value chain. And at ANCA, we really do focus on that, on building this kind of projects. And I know that the UNIDO in Madagascar also requires high focus on productive use in energy demand assessments for rectification projects through small hydro. So basically, I would say that, this is a major barrier to me as, again, the private sector. And this would also mean that, for instance, the RBF mechanisms that we see more and more in this industry coming in could be maybe reviewed to focus more on the nature of the connections instead of just the number of connections. Because now, if we want to get a subsidy, for instance, through RBF mechanisms, we have to deliver as many connections as possible, which in some way makes no sense if we want to focus more on productive use and enable those productive use to get connected. That would be my main comments.
Okay. Thank you. Very good compliment to Francis's points. Anybody else? Florent.
Come up?
Yes.
Yes. Hello, everyone. This is Florent from GIZ representing the NDEF project. So I think Francis and Camille really described a good part of the story. So what we've seen is also on the tier system. So I think NDEF was really good at promoting like lower tier system, and whenever we are moving higher up, that's where we have the difficulty, and that's where we have the difficulty in terms of the incentives, the product, and I think for the end user clients, it's also always to make this down payment. So the down payment for pump is not the same as a solar lantern, and that's the part where this is the barrier. And the second part, I think, is for us. It's also like, okay, so we sit here in Eschborn, Frankfurt, Germany. So we know what all this energy product can bring in terms of productivity for farmers. But I'm not sure we have the same sense of awareness in the different countries of companies being able to reach small-scale farmers in very rural areas. And I think also our messaging is not always the good one. We don't use, or we would use like mass media that are not adapted to rural areas, languages, and so on and so forth. So just to build up on what Camille and Francis just already said, and I think also Julian on the currency risk and hard currency versus local currency. I think the down payment is the barrier, and then information awareness raising. That would be it on my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Juliana?
If we have a little bit more time, but I spoke a lot today already. But just to mention a couple of experiences that we have had in Tanzania, especially, we see barriers to the deployment of productive use, because those who deploy energy service technology or solar home systems not necessarily have the same skill set to support the deployment of, in majority of the case, of course, for Camille, maybe it's different, you have specialized on that already, but we have seen the difficulties around that. We see an opportunity on this area to partner with those organizations already servicing the rural smallholder farmers, such as providers of seeds, of quality seeds, of small machinery, and instead of convert a fish to have wings, but actually find the bird that is around already. So that has been in Tanzania. We are partnering up with a microfinance institution and a local on-the-ground organization that provides this agricultural knowledge to work with solar irrigation, with increased productivity, to make sure that there is distribution and there is no loss on this additional productivity. And in Cambodia, we have seen also similar struggles, because as they wanted energy technology providers to provide the productive use and distribute and provide consumer lending, they found a better way via microfinance institutions to provide the lending and partner with those already providing machinery to those farmers. Of course, Asia sometimes is a little bit ahead on the small farmer processes, but it's a partnership indeed, solution that we have seen, not to make everybody to not make energy companies have to distribute these productive use services, but actually use those that are already there, and bring the energy providers to bring the service and the electricity, and those that have already the agricultural service to just make the energy transition together. We also spoke with leasing companies, small leasing companies, and they were very against going into the off-grid clean energy space. We haven't given ourselves, we haven't given up, but we will pursue with them how can we address their issues on that. They have raised issues such as rapid change on technology, so that the residual value of any product that would be recollected, would not be enough, for example. These were some of the barriers that they were mentioning.
Okay. Okay, so we've heard a lot about barriers. Yes, if I may, I mean, this disconnect also between the energy suppliers and those that work on appliances. And so sometimes the affordability of a solar mill is less than a diesel mill. So no wonder the farmer won't do that. So you need to also not work only on the energy systems, but also on the appliances system. I think somebody mentioned that. But there are some very interesting examples where the intermediates between the energy suppliers and the work actually also, and the agri-food actors, they also work on improving the performance of the appliances, so that a renewable energy appliance compared to diesel appliances, for example, because then you have fossil fuels subsidies which complicate it. Anyway, I think we've heard enough about the barriers. Let's move to potential solutions. Yeah. Again, who would like to take the floor first?
Well, this is Camille. I can start. Yeah, I think that there were very interesting things mentioned earlier, and just to rebound on one thing that I just said about knowing better the environment and the markets, I still think that this is very important. And what I know, for instance, in Madagascar, but also in Senegal and in Zambia, is that IFC recently commissioned a market study on solar technologies for agricultural value chains, with the ultimate goal to encourage local banks to finance productive solar technologies such as irrigation, cold chain, and agribusiness technologies for companies, customers, and other off-grid energy players, particularly in agriculture. So I think that this kind of initiative is a good starting point, because without knowing the demand, it's very difficult to propose an adapted offer. But that's my very basic understanding as, again, the private sector. But I'm still one of those people who think that too many consultancy are not necessarily helpful. So maybe just focus on the ones that are very, very interesting and that can bring enriching and inspiring outcome. But in reality, I mean, rebounding on what Julian said about partnering with existing entities and combine basically strengths to be in a better position to support the transition of those sectors. I think that this is a very good point, and very positive for the future, and to move all of that forward. But the reality is that, at least in my case, and I'm giving the example of Madagascar, there is no major strong and adapted financial mechanisms or very strong stakeholders involved in that sector. So actually, most of the time, this is up to the private sector to be for proposals and propose initiatives and financing mechanisms for their own productive customers. So yeah, what I see is that microfinance institutions are not necessarily familiar with this sector and this kind of customers. They're sometimes too afraid. And we do also acknowledge that as private operators and being on the field, we know those customers, we know how they behave, we know that what are their constraints, we know what they can afford for, and so on. So what we've done so far as the private sector is to actually propose pre-financing for electrical equipment and productive machines. We have worked on developing new concepts that tied energy access and agricultural development, such as the agrogrid model that I think I already introduced last time during the last VEF session last year. But, you know, trying to link and to tie energy access, because this is not the end. I mean, electricity access is just a tool, it's just a mean for further development. If we do not translate that or convert that mean into a meaningful added value creation activity, it means nothing and it's pointless. So that's what we've been trying to do again as a company, and yeah, again trying to finance productive use. I mean, I'll just give you a very simple example, but like an off-grid customer that has a rice machine and that wants to get connected to the grid will have to change its combustion engine to an electrical one, and that needs money because it's very costly. So either get support to change this engine, or you even have to buy a new equipment from scratch because he doesn't have the possibility for changing this engine. And this is just an isolated need. So microfinance institutions, at least in Madagascar, because they may be too unfamiliar with the sector, want to see large portfolio of potential customers that they could give a loan to, which is not necessarily very easy to compile and to present. And those individual customers living in rural areas do not have access to those microfinance institutions. They don't even know that there are possibilities and opportunities for getting financed. So the easiest way for them is to address the local operator. Yeah, sorry, Olivier.
Yeah.
I was
Just a couple of things. Be careful with the intermediate you work with, because there's a matter of trust between the farmer or the food chain actors and these intermediates. I mean, if you take the middleman, it really the relationship can be sometimes not very good. So I mean, if you count on them, then you have to be careful how they relate to the agri-food chains. Just my personal opinion. But what I haven't heard, and maybe other colleagues panelists will add to that, is digital technology to know better the customer profile. And for example, smart sensors for mills, that kind of stuff, which is really innovative technology and really helps a lot. Finding out what is the customer profile, where is the dynamics of the energy use. Anyway, I'm moving beyond my moderator role here. Sorry, other people can chip in. Sorry.
No, Olivier, I think you're right, spot on. That is something we are experimenting currently in Ethiopia, because there's a lot of reported data and limited actual measured data. We are moving forward with a digitalized mill, a prototyped one, to actually measure what's the consumption profile and what it leads towards in terms of savings for the processor and load increase for the mini-grid operator. So I think you're really spot on what needs to happen. One of the things that has already appeared to us, at least at the modeling stage, is that there is a potential for decrease in terms of cost of service and for saving. But it does require to be retrofit, which means there's a whole set of development of equipment that almost needs to happen in line with what other organizations have already outlined. and which almost refers or points out to impact investing to develop those. So I think that that's a totally valid point. I'd like to circle back to what you mentioned, Camille, earlier, because I think that's a very valid point around blended projects that incorporate at their very early stage both the agricultural thinking and the energy thinking. And even though the mandates are not necessarily on the two areas, the two sectors, there is probably an opportunity to leverage some of the thinking around climate change and climate finance to actually create a single spectrum to invest into those. That's some of the thinking that is being developed by philanthropics at the moment. What I do reckon is that it is challenging to have that portfolio up and ready, but the upfront effort is probably one of the best way to accelerate in the tail end. I'll end up very quickly with one suggestion in terms of solution that comes from what we are experimenting again, this time in Ethiopia. We are a bit lucky because of the agricultural ecosystem, because there are community-based organizations that have been providing seeds, and that linkage between communities, microfinance, and the community and the organization exists. One of the flags we did receive from microfinance institutions is that they would indeed make loans for productive use appliance. They are happy to lower the down payment and the initial upfront cost, but one of their top requirements was they need standards. They are actually requesting equipment standards, a bit similar to solar home system standards early on, to be in a position to carve out which equipment are less risky, so to speak, for them to engage in a very valid way. So it's part of a solution, and yet at the same time, with what we are learning on the prototyping effort, a whole set of equipment and a whole set of standards needs to be developed at the same time. So midway there, but it does flag perhaps one direction that could be taken.
Yeah, the environment often lags behind these things, I mean, in terms of regulations and policies. Right, I saw Florent before, wanted to say something, please?
Yeah, thank you. No, I think it's true to come back to the initial question. So I think we have 5 innovations, but the main thing that is like common to all of these is the link with cooperative universities and the government. Because I mean, I often have the impression we talk private sector, development actors, and within GIZ we call it the political partner. And in the field of agricultural productive use, it's also the agricultural structures like cooperatives that are major in this field. Then in terms of standards, I think, so we already have various standards for solar water pumping, yet not for milling, and so on and so forth. But these are things that are moving in the sense that we have agreements with Verasol. So if we have a product that is not standardized, okay, I'm out. No, I'm back. Then we can have a rapid testing methodology. Then I think it was mentioned by Julian. So I think we all have small RBFs here and there on productive use of energy. So as NDEF, we have one in Tanzania, we have one in Uganda, in Kenya. So we kind of tailor the incentives based on the tier system. And when you develop an RBF, then you need to have the standard that goes with it. So this would work. And then, of course, there was the Biogas Innovation Fund in Vietnam that was quite successful. Revolving fund for local cooperatives in Nepal so they could develop electricity production. And then the big Bolivia program, so linking government, cooperative system, and also universities that are also sometimes a bit lacking in the discussions. So yeah, I think we've seen a lot of things happening in South America, Southeast Asia, and the only partnership and financing solutions that as NDEF we've piloted is in sub-Saharan Africa is PUE RBFs and business development system supports and FSDs, but this is growing. So maybe when we talk about future plans, we can discuss about this. Thank you.
Yes, Florent, you mentioned this RBF, but I mean, for me, a question always with RBF is that at the beginning, the user needs the money because he will be, and so there are solutions, I think, I don't remember now the mechanism where there's a third party that becomes part of the mechanism that takes the brunt of the initial payment, because otherwise the user needs to pay at the beginning, and it can be a big constraint. Anyway, Juliana, you wanted to add something?
They said it all, and in the interest of time, I would save my words for the next question then.
No, any opinion about this RBF thing? Because the question I raised about the initial down payment, at the initial payment, you are refunded when results are there. I always find it difficult for the user. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, we do
ahead, Juliana.
We do have experience with RBF, and just to mention to Camille, the BGFA in Africa does pay additional incentives to productive use appliances. And we started that in Zambia already, and now expanding in Burkina Faso and Uganda on that matter, as we also share the consciousness that there needs to be productive use to increase the income and purchasing power. And going back to Olivier's questions, yes, the way the RBF, Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, is set up, it really pushes the companies to go into rural areas that were underserved before and where affordability is a constraint. So one of the effects is indeed reduce the price, the cost, so that it becomes more affordable.
Okay.
And that's it. With the intention and the understanding that in the long run, synergies within the company and volume gains in scale will offset that, and that subsidy or grant would not be needed anymore.
Okay, very interesting. I mean, we could talk for hours here. Anyway, time is a constraint. We are moving to maybe the third question. No, before that, I wanted to ask if any of you has experience on what is called the ABC model, where you aggregate demand. For example, you have a big anchor company, and then you have business, and then you have communities. I mean, the experience shows that it may work, except if these different actors are spread, which causes cost increase overall. But I mean, if you have any experience of these kind of, where you have a big user of energy combined with smaller users, and if any feedback on that? No.
Of course. I mean, I'm just not sure if the question is, do we have experience any financing mechanisms funding this kind of projects, or if I have projects running, or if we know projects running this way?
If you're experiencing what we call this ABC, anchor business community model seems to work from your side, because very often there's the big expectations, but when between the different types of partners, you have different costs and so on, so they fight between themselves. But also, if they are spread all over the place, then of course the costs increase, and so it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But that is an interesting question because in Madagascar we work on a concept that again ties energy and agribusiness development, and we do think that it's very important to partner with a strong and specialized entity that can support us, because as a private operator in mini-grid development, we are not experts in agribusiness development or agricultural practices. So we need to partner with those kind of experts, but we find a way to smooth that into, I guess, intelligent models. And so I guess, yeah, just sharing the same vision makes things easier. So it might not work in all the cases, but we have worked on some models that do integrate both the mini-grid development and deployment and an agribusiness component deployment, such as literally a factory for agricultural processing activities. But the problem is there to get the finance for financing both at the same time, because most of the time a financier wants to get the mini-grid financed, and we'll have to tackle another kind of investor for the agri components, and that's where it becomes a little bit tricky.
Okay. Right. No, the reason why I was asking this, it's moving actually to the third question, which is, right, we've talked about individual experiences here, but the third question becomes, okay, something works, how to scale it up? So what kind of things are needed to scale up an interesting model or interesting examples? And I think it moves probably more into public-partner partnerships, policies, regulations, institutional support, ESCOs and stuff like that. I mean, what is your experience in moving from individual projects to scaling them up or replicating them at the country level, but even at a sub-regional level?
Well, I can start again.
Okay.
Very short, because I'm very curious to hear what are the other speakers' proposals or ideas. But I rebound on what Julian said about the BGFA. That's indeed an interesting mechanism, and we are testing it as applicants at the moment. But yeah, I think that's developing more funding mechanisms that do combine financing for CAPEX and infrastructure, as well as funding for productive use equipment, or supporting the development of this productive use locally, at least for, I don't know, maybe the first year or the first couple of years, would be very interesting to see more and more. I mean, from all the discussions I've had with my peers in this sector, this is something that is more and more needed. If we want to see, more results, I guess that combining those type of funding would be interesting.
So you mean, Camille, financing the capex of the investments in energy with financing the appliances for the users, but also, I mean, farming campaigns, maybe, we also fund that at the beginning, because for the farmers, maybe they get credits and so on, so they have difficulties financially. So combining both sides, basically.
Yeah.
Financing both sides.
Yeah, the two types, there may be two different things or two complementary things. On one hand, combining funding for both CAPEX or infrastructure dedicated to the mini-grids themselves and the energy part of the projects, and the productive use equipment, because this is something that we discussed. And for example, the BGFA is indeed building an incentive towards that path. And maybe also because we've all mainly been talking about hard investment, but there would be maybe also some things to do on the soft aspect of all of it, because we need to also support this whole transition, and that comes not only with equipment and material and funding for that, but also support in raising awareness, in modernizing the practices, in getting aware of new technologies or equipment or whatever, and building capacity. Because again, in the end, the private operator or the developer or the promoter don't have all the skill set to do all of that. So if we want to build more partnerships and make sure that all these experts in their own field get together and develop more, fruitful projects, we have to find a way.
This is social energy innovations. For example, in Tajikistan, there's a World Bank project where you have young community leaders who get trained, and then they themselves raise awareness of the people, and they are trusted because they belong to these communities. Anyway, I saw Florent raise his hand.
Yeah, I think on our side, what is needed is the link between appliance providers. So in the sense that, so in Uganda, we are developing like a credit reference system, so the different companies can know better if the client already has a credit with another PEGO company. Then again, in Uganda, so in one of the RBF, the company can not claim directly the incentive, but can only claim it in case of default. And also to have this remoteness index. So if you do your sale away from the main hub, the main urban center, then the incentive is higher, because it means more efforts for you to link with your clients and to market your product over there. And then of course to link the incentive with the tier system. And then I think one of the things that I haven't seen, but I don't know everything, is to kind of have some kind of specific PEGO system for farmers. So in the sense that you don't pay every month the same amount, but you could pay less at the beginning and more when you get your harvest. But it's also, we go back to the question of sharing knowledge between different sectors. As Camille said, like you have the agriculture silo, you have the energy silo, and sometimes also the finance silo. And it's really difficult to have everyone to be on the same page. And then the last thing that we're also doing in Uganda is to have a PWE, how do we call it? Repairing hub. So to make sure that all the companies providing PWE appliances, they have their clients have only one number to call or to reach to say, okay, I have a problem with my pump. How can I get support? So how can we link the client with operation and maintenance? And yeah, I mean, these are a few ideas around the system that I have. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Francis, Juliana, want to add something? How to scale up?
A lot has already been said. I concur to all the solutions that have been pointed out. I'll give an example of what we are leaning toward. Speaks to the coordination between the four sectors we've mentioned now, which is developing a program, an incentive program, actually aimed at agricultural or community-based organization. And the aim there really is to foster the cooperation between the energy provider and the agricultural organization, so that when the energy provider is targeting a specific location, they can work hand in hand, or we can direct the agricultural or the organization into that same location to start building capacity and start creating the linkage between the processor or the farmer and the financial institution. So almost creating a symmetry in terms of timeline of project development and timeline of productive use development. So that's one thing. We are creating dedicated grants, but not aimed necessarily at the energy provider. And the second effort that is ongoing is to develop tailored product for productive use, specifically with microfinance institution, at least in a test phase, and see what that would imply in terms of credit line. I'll stop there, but yeah, I do agree that a lot of the potential solutions have already been highlighted.
One thing I haven't heard, though, is mapping the best locations for investing in renewable energy solutions for food chains. And I think this is actually quite interesting. I mean, you have an organization like Power for All who did this in Uganda, where you find that the mills are, for maize, for example, are where the grid is. And if you have potential yield increase, but nothing is happening, is because you don't have energy. So if you locate the areas where you have potential to increase your yields, but you don't have energy, then you can say that's the best place to locate my mini grids to have a multiplier effect on the food chains. And I mean, FAO, we do that for food chain residues, for bioenergy, but mapping the best locations, I think, is also one way to scale up. Okay, Juliana, you're always the last but not least.
Thank you. Very kind. Well, we see the opportunity to scale up really to support the local financial. I speak from the finance side, right? I have my finance hat. To involve local financial institutions, and that's our commitment to really scale. And whenever international lenders are present, are supporting the sector, take local financial institutions alongside. It's an effort in the beginning, but peer-to-peer learning is a big part of the solution.
Mm.
We see
Yes.
that local financial institutions are not lending to the off-grid clean energy sector. However, international lenders are. So let's, hold hands and take them alongside. We see the penetration of microfinance institutions, the use of technology to deploy, to screen borrowers, to mobile money, to deploy the funds as a big leapfrog opportunity. And we've seen that in action in Cambodia, for example, and it has been very successful. And so we see that technology is there to stay, definitely, and not only to map with drones and pictures and all these, the best places, but also to deploy the funding. And mobile money in Africa is a big tool to do that.
Okay, interesting stuff going on the chat box, but we're coming to the end. Actually, in less than 5 minutes, we have to move to the plenary. So, anything you would like to add? Maybe another interesting experience. I haven't heard anything on policies, actually. No, I heard things on standards, but for example, I haven't heard anything on, the fact that you have regulations, for example, that can hinder or can actually favor. I think there's something on, for example, in Tanzania about regulation for smallholder power system generation, for example, which is like guidelines. So that kind of stuff, I think, besides standards, is also interesting. What I'm also thinking beyond that is longer term is education, that people who deal with agriculture in their curriculum, they should learn a bit about the greening of food chains, which immediately leads them to green energy, to renewable energy. I mean, in agronomy courses, you have very little, if anything, on energy. Okay, Florent.
Maybe on that one. So GIZ is a big company, and we have different projects. So some working on agriculture, some working on agriculture and energy, us working on energy, and some working on capacity building. So basically what we're trying to do is to have these 4 projects that are working on productive use of energy in agriculture to come up together, and especially through the what we call the Green Innovation Center, to develop specific curriculums for renewable energy in these green innovation centers. So that's pretty new, and it's GIZ internal, but we share information between our 4 projects, and we try to integrate as much as possible renewable energy use in mechanization courses through the Green Innovation Center project. So of course, it's not targeting all the countries, and we always have difficulties. But also again, on standard, I think we are sharing a lot with another project called the Greens People Energy on the standard for appliances, and we are discussing a lot. But that's only internal to GIZ. Then in terms of policy, that's the part where we are weak, because the agriculture colleagues, they talk to the Ministry of Agriculture, the energy project, they talk to the Ministry of Energy, and that's where it's tough. So of course we ask for everything the sector wants in terms of VIT and so on and so forth, but it's really difficult to have the 2 ministries together to support the deployment of some appliances.
What on that one, I'm missing, of course, we experience all that, I mean, silo approaches, but Francis had an interesting suggestion when you bring in climate finance and you say, well, you know, the Ministry of Environment, we have money. The Ministry of Environment is often weak, but if they have climate finance and they are the hosts of the NDC and all these climate finance mechanisms, GCF, for example, then it kind of, it's an incentive for the ministries of energy and the user ministries to work together, because this is a way to get funding. And I think Francis was alluding to that, and I think he has a point there. Okay, I see that we have to leave in 1 minute. To kindly press on the green series. Yes, we are asked basically to leave the meeting and go back to the plenary. Okay, see you there.
Very, very excited by the introduction session that we were given by Juliana, and I think she did set the stage for the conversations that we're going to have today. So as mentioned by Ana Lucia, my name is Pasia Mayo Gola, and I'm here representing the Society for International Development, but also the SDG7 Youth Constituency. And I'm very, very excited to be joined by a very vibrant panel, so to say. And I'll just give 1 minute to you all to introduce yourself so that you do justice by introducing yourself accordingly. So we'll start with you, Tanya.
Thanks, Pasi, and thanks for moderating the session for us. So I'm Tanya. I work for the Shell Foundation. I'm a research and advocacy manager for one of our programs called KC, which is catalyzing agriculture by scaling up energy ecosystems. So this is a partnership between FCDO and Shell Foundation. So I manage all of our investor relations work, as well as looking at research and partnerships and evidence generation for the sector. I've been working in Shell Foundation for the past 3 years now. And before this was located in India, and recently have moved to London.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Pleasure to have you on the panel today. We'll move straight on to Jonathan Phillips.
Jesse, hi everybody. I'm Jonathan Phillips. I'm from Duke University in the US. I'm the project there. The Energy Access Project is a very external facing academic based program. So we both leverage the capacity of the research community on development and energy challenges in low and middle income countries, and you know, offer educational opportunities at the university and elsewhere. Try to identify the areas where policy guidance and fill gaps or facilitate investment. And one of the areas that we do a lot of work in is finance and the productivity energy equation. So excited to be with you all and part of the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Deepak, do you want to introduce yourself to us?
Glad to. Thank you so much, everyone. And also thank you so much for having me here. My name is Deepak Mohapatra, and I come from India originally. Right now, I'm working as the Policy and Business Development Officer at the Alliance for Rural Electrification. For those of you who don't know ARE, ARE is an international business association which is striving to create and to drive a sustainable, decentralized renewable energy industry or sector for the modern generation in 21st century. How we do that is by enabling access to clean and affordable energy services for the people where it matters the most, and in doing so, creating local income generation opportunities and having one inclusive economies approach. Looking forward to the wonderful discussion that we are going to have today. Thank you so much.
Deepak, and welcome, Rin. It's so nice finally having you here. Please, can you introduce yourself to our listeners today?
Sure. Thank you, Passy, and sorry everyone for this technical difficulty. So my name is Rim. I'm joining from Sunfunder. We are essentially a debt financing enterprises that focuses on solar enterprises that have activities in emerging and frontier markets. We've been active for 8 years now, lending across the solar spectrum with a strong focus on sub-Saharan Africa, Africa as a whole, as well as the Middle East more and more. Before actually joining Sunfunder and focusing on energy, I was looking at agricultural investments at Responsibility, which is a similar debt financing institution. So I'm very much looking forward to our conversation where I hopefully would bring a bit of the two perspectives, the agri and the solar, and how we can bridge the two together.
Thank you so much for those introductions. Now that we know who we're going to be talking with, it's an absolute pleasure to invite all the listeners to engage with our speakers today. Feel free to add your comments and your questions to the chat box, and where we can, we will be having responses to the question. I request for our speakers, please also feel free to interact with the listeners to the chat box should they have a direct question to you. So having said that, once again, my name is Passy Amayo, and I'm the program manager at the Society for International Development, focusing on sustainable energy futures for Eastern Africa. It's a pleasure to moderate this session. So we'll jump straight into the questions for today. Our panel is going to be looking at investments and partnerships under today's theme for this session 7. And my first question is going to be to you, Jonathan. Can you please give us what are some of the examples of public and private sector financing schemes promoting the food energy nexus in your perspective and in your work?
Sure, thanks, Passy. So my first reaction here was, there's nobody doing rural electrification and ag productivity at like a huge scale anywhere in the world that I'm super familiar with. So I think we can talk about examples of public-private financing schemes, but I want to caution us against sort of pointing to any particular example and saying that's the answer and that's what needs to be replicated everywhere. But I think the first thing to talk about is, private capital doesn't like uncertainty, right? And if we want the private sector to put money in and to have skin in the game, then we have to figure out how to de-risk some of these projects. But these are two sectors that don't have a lot of existing history of talking to each other. Almost everyone working on this issue comes at it as either specialist from the agriculture side. And for energy people like me, the largest area of uncertainty in these types of projects is really power demand. So solar mini-grids, for example, to power irrigation, they might be economically viable in a lot of places. I'm looking at in this area in Ethiopia, and these might be commercial without subsidy at some point in the future, but we're not there yet. But I think what's attractive is, pumping systems can generate power loads that are 10x or 20x what the power consumed in nearby villages might be. And that's power that can be used when it's generated. And there's a huge value to that. As I'm looking at, as an energy person, it's a demand challenge because we don't know how that demand is going to materialize. With that irrigation example, should we expect farmers, with greater power and water capabilities, will they keep patterns or, sort of just go from using X amount of water to 2X? Or should we expect farmers, are going to shift from maize to mangoes or avocados and consume not 2X, but maybe 10X, and maybe consumption is now year-round rather than seasonal. And the answer to that has massive implications for how much energy you're going to need and how large you're going to build your system. So, the financing schemes that we're seeing, I think, reflect this uncertainty, and they're really kind of disproportionate based right now, where government or a donor can front the capex and sort of buy down the project cost on the front end. But grants can only take us so far, and longer term, as was alluded to in the introductory remarks here, if we're going to mobilize climate finance in larger tranches of capital, we need to figure out how to get more debt into these projects. So happy to talk a little bit more about that bridge. I think one of the areas to think about is kind of, at least from the energy world, I think we've come out of the last few years in building a lot of mini grids with some important lessons learned around that CapEx subsidy. That sector's mostly done it through results-based financing or auction procurements. And, whether it's on the front end, kind of providing that capital subsidy through an auction or competitive, through delivering the connection or delivering the result. They can both work in this new setting, but I think we just need to get a lot of experience under our belt. So I'll pause there. I think we still have a lot more to dive into.
Thank you so much for setting the stage for us, Jonathan. I think I will go straight to you, Tanya, especially because Jonathan mentioned, the transition to energy, especially to solar energy, especially for powering irrigation in the irrigation sector. And I just want to get your mind from a Shell perspective and, kind of the transition into renewables that Shell might be having, and maybe what are some of the public and private, financial schemes that you are considering at Shell as you focus more on more sustainable energy sources, especially in the context of food and energy.
Thank you, Passy. So just a correction. So I'm from Shell Foundation, and we are so we are focused purely on clean energy solutions and supporting early stage social enterprises working in energy access, sustainable mobility, as well as agriculture to scale up. So I would like to echo what Jonathan said about there being no clear answer currently about public-private partnerships enabling finance in the sector. But I think what we are trying to do is test new approaches because I think there is a lot of appetite and recognition by the private sector that there is need to collaborate more with public sector finance and to use other forms of capital to reduce risk for themselves, which is one of the key considerations as mentioned by Julianne and also by Jonathan. So I would just like to share one example, and this is something that is currently work in progress and we are working on, is trying to see how we can use our grant to catalyze debt for working capital for agriculture sector enterprises working with energy innovation. So this would be innovations like in cold storage and cold chain, in irrigation, and agri-tech, which helps these hardware innovations to scale, and also investing in farmer cooperatives, again, to be able to adopt these innovations. So we are trying to work with, so this is a multi-stakeholder collaboration, working with Rabo Foundation, with IKEA Foundation, and Shell Foundation. So all three of us getting together and looking at how our grant can catalyze a guarantee. So this is hopefully soon going to be approved and going to be launched in the next few weeks. So the structure is so we're testing this in India, because in India we saw there was appetite by local lenders to provide more and more working capital to enterprises, but they were unable to, again, because of the risk profile. So how the structure is basically that we are providing a small risk capital to USDFC, who is then catalyzing 55 million worth of working capital in India through 3 lenders. So this guarantee mechanism basically enables us to reduce the foreign exchange risk, because this is local lenders, as well as to remove the risk, to reduce some of the risk of the lenders being able to fund enterprises at an earlier stage than they're used to. So this is just one example, and this was actually catalyzed because of COVID, and I think that COVID came as a shock, because of which a lot of investments and a lot of urgency came, because of which so many different organizations are now able to work together and understand the speed and agility needed to work together. So I think this is just one of the examples. The other is basically just the program Shell Foundation has in partnership with FCDO, which is KC, which I mentioned in my introduction. It's focused on supporting early stage innovations, which are now ready to scale to be able to replicate their models across different geographies within Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. So I think that's another good example of, but it's still using grant. So partnering together to use grant to then catalyze commercial investment. So our focus is on creating that capital continuum that Julian spoke about in her presentation, and through our grant, reducing the risk and showing proof of concept of scale to other investors to then be able to accordingly come in. But I do think there's a lot of scope still there for more innovations and testing out new approaches for public and private finance to work together.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing those examples, especially from your work. I think it broadens the conversation. And Deepak, I'm going to just come to you, especially because, again, Jonathan mentioned in the beginning that rural education is lacking, and I see that you are affiliated to the Alliance for Rural Electrification. So I just want to give you the opportunity to probably give us from your perspective, especially from a rural setting, what are some of those public-private sector financing schemes that are promoting the food and energy nexus in different rural locations?
Yes, thank you so much. And I would very much like to echo with what Tanya and Jonathan mentioned, that nowadays, pretty much many of the projects that we see in the DRE sector are grant powered. And I fully agree with the phrase that there is just so far we can go with the grant powered projects. Therefore, there is definitely a strong need for unlocking many different kind of innovative financing in DRE related projects. Coming to the agriculture part of it, I would like to draw the audiences and also the panelists' attention to the latest publication that we recently launched, which was titled DRE Innovation to Boost Agri-Sector Productivity and Address Global Food System Challenges. Over there, we did manage to single out several examples in form of case studies from our members and beyond, where we saw different examples of how private and public partnerships in terms of financing can work and be fruitful for a project. I would like to cite 3 such examples. One would be Off-Grid Sun, one of our members who did an access to water project in Zimbabwe. Over there, the total budget of the project was about 890,000 euros, from which the majority of the funding came from AICS, which is the Development Cooperation entity from Italy, and also Action Aid Zimbabwe. And then other part was taken care or covered by LEAD, which is an acronym for Linkages for Economics Advancements of the Disadvantaged. So the whole, the structure of these financing was grant plus equity. And that was a project which was successful in Zimbabwe, and they are which ran for 3 years, and they are also looking forward to see what more they can do. Coming to my second example here would be from GFM. GFM is one of our members from Spain who did a pilot project there to test a prototype for providing access to water again. And there we saw again the mix of grant and equity, where the total project cost was 100,000 euros, and the regional government in Spain covered 80% of that cost, and the rest was covered by GFM itself. And that project was the prototyping was successful, and they are going to scale it up in the regions where the climate is dry and where they can produce water from the air itself. Now, I would also like to draw your attention to a project done by UNIDO itself in association with TEISA. That was a community DRE project in Guinea-Bissau, which was an interesting project in terms of financing, because it was, of course, the project cost was 2.2 million euros, and it was covered both by grant as well as there was elements of debt inside there. And how that was done? By the help of microcredit financing for initial connection cost. And then to strike a balance between the certain group of people for their inability to pay, and also looking at the long-term sustainability of the project itself, cost-reflective tariff was established in order to kind of bridge the gap between that. So all in all, these are the three examples where we have seen how a different structure of the financing can work for a project. And I would also invite you all to have a look at the publication itself in our website, where you can find many such other instances in form of the case studies, where you see how different financing can bring together more opportunities, can unlock many private sector investments, can attract the investors to see how these test cases are working and how we can scale up. I would rest here and let you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepak. I think those examples kind of give us, a little bit of view on where we are and what's happening out there. So I really, really appreciate that. And to an extent that you can, Deepak, please feel free to drop a link of the publication to the chat box, just so that our speakers can have access to that.
Yes, I will do that right away.
Thank you so much. I want to bring in Rim into the conversation, and maybe just to usher us into the second question that we have for the day. And Rim, I'm just going to go ahead and ask you, what is the balance? What is the balance of public and private sector finance that we should work towards? Is there a balance? If there is, how should we work towards it?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Passy. I just would like to start by saying that we either haven't seen large programs that were specifically catered for agri-energy topics. We've seen programs for agri, we've seen programs for energy, but nothing that combines the two. So for us as private lenders, we would love to see more of that happening, and hopefully our conversation is gonna bring ideas to how this could be done. We've seen it in other segments, and I think Jonathan was speaking about the Minigrid sector, where RBF programs have been more and more sophisticated, more and more catered specifically to where it was mostly needed, and making them, honestly, over the last few years, incredibly catalytic. We've ourselves financed very recently a program in Uganda that's backed by GIZ in the Minigrid space. And this is just the pilot for what's hopefully going to be a very large program for the country. So those programs are desperately needed, and nowhere in the world agri and energy has been made commercial without the help and support of the public sector. So we shouldn't be ashamed of needing more public funding into the sector at a much larger scale than what it is now. In terms of balance, I think that we need to, answer your question, Passy, I think that we need to specifically see what are the risks that we're trying to mitigate. Agri and energy, as we all know, are certainly one of the two sectors that need the most risk-sharing tools, because they're by essence sectors with higher risk perception, especially in developing countries, because of typically, the technologies which are still not mastered, I would say, markets that are still underdeveloped. We've talked a lot about the FX risk and that underlying sort of burden that the end users generally support, the price fluctuation of the commodities themselves, to a lot of extent, when you take out, cocoa, coffee, etc., the price patterns of commodities is incredibly volatile, etc. The difficulty of logistics and so on. We are all aware of that. So I think that those are the very specific risks that we should be listing and putting in front of them or towards them a solution that would help alleviate. Another category when you talk about the financing and how the public can support the private sector here is in terms of tenor of investments. Those investments typically require very long-term funding. Typically, commercial lenders are not able to provide loans above 6-7 years of tenor. So a mechanism in which the public sector can subsidize or at least provide certain support for that, additional 5 to 6 years that's needed to get to a 10-12 years tenor would be incredibly valuable. And the last point that I wanted to mention was, just reminding ourselves at what time of the process are we? We're very much at the beginning of this whole revolution. Business models are still not proven. We're seeing, we're seeing this sector learning from other sectors. So we're seeing solar irrigation using pay-as-you-go technologies that they've borrowed from the solar home system space. We've seen cold storage looking at asset-backed financing with SPVs and so on. So there is cross-fertilization, but it's very much the beginning. So we also have to collectively just remind ourselves that it's normal. We're learning how to crawl, and we'll stand soon, but we're not there just yet. Yeah.
Got that. Thank you so much, Rim, for giving us those examples again, and how we can work towards balance in those two, both public, private sector finance. I want to bring you back into the conversation, Jonathan, just so that you can feed in and weigh in on this question, especially from your perspective. Is there a balance? And if there is, how can you work towards it?
I think it's a tough question to answer broadly. I think you have to answer this at sort of the country level, depending on the local context and what the goals are. But maybe here are some things that Rim talked about, some excellent points on the ag side, but on the energy side, I go back to electricity tariffs a lot. Does a country have cost reflective tariffs, meaning can whoever is selling the power recoup their investments through rates or selling kilowatt hours? For most utilities in Africa, for example, they cannot. The question of, what is the tariff level in a country? Is it closer to, 3 cents like it is, or is it 20 times that like it is in Liberia? And, are the rural ag projects that we have in mind here, are they going to be bound by the same rules that utilities and, mini-grid or off-grid providers are bound by? And basically what I'm getting at here is that this question of who pays, right? Because if you're expecting the private sector to finance a lot of this, then you must also expect that they will require being paid back, right? And that could fall largely on income farmers. So it kind of brings in another point of like how transformational are these projects going to be? If you want greater private sector financing, we should really be asking tough questions around like what sort of increased productivity can we expect? And can that increased productivity pay for some of these projects? So I think the greater the productivity gains, the more farmers are able for energy or for the water whatever that the energy is powering, the less you need from public sources. But this, becomes very political very fast, right? Because if we figure out that rural farmers are willing and able to pay the energy costs that their wealthier urban counterparts pay, does that mean it should be allowed? Maybe, but there's already deep skepticism of the private sector in many of these countries, where these are kind of ripe opportunities. And I think forcing rural farmers to pay more than their urban counterparts is going to be a dicey political calculation. So I think every country needs to answer these questions differently, and that will determine sort of the public-private financing burden, at least initially. But I do think there's, regardless of context, a few essential items that all programs need to embrace or at least consider. One being that, the private sector should have skin in the game. I've seen a lot of well-intended energy projects that, allow a private sector entity to get their money out in year one. That can happen. Like, we should fully expect a private project and be out after year one. Be a balance, and I think we've learned a lot in the last 10 years on how to make these projects sustainable. But you also probably have to have some sort of CapEx subsidy. I think we've all stated this in some way, shape, or form. The sector doesn't actually exist yet in most places. We're front-ended this, as Rim alluded to. And this flexible grant capital is what's going to get us from, a Shell Foundation to a Sun Funder, to a DFI funded project, to a commercial bank. We're at stage one. Last point, I think technical assistance or educational resources are really important to bring communities along on this. In some ways, this is a collective action problem and requires people to be and on the same page. And I think the classic development trap here is to, impose on people a better mousetrap and not give them the tools and the flexibility to adapt it. And I think technical assistance or educational resources coupled with, pilot programs can be really effective. I'll leave it there.
So much, Jonathan, for those very, very interesting points. I mean, listening to you speaking about the rural farmers and their capacity to be able to finance themselves vis-a-vis private sector financing, and also, comparing that to, their counterparts in the urban areas, it brought to mind a quote by Willie Nelson, who rightfully said that our food systems are in the hands of many family farmers, not under the control of a handful of corporations. And that just brings the political question that immediately arises when you start to talk about these issues. So thank you so much for bringing in the political economic aspect to the conversation. I think I want to give an opportunity to you, Deepak, to weigh in on this question and just to add in your perspective.
Yeah, well, I was really thinking if there could be a balance that we can strike here, but I don't see it, because there is, number one, no size fits all. There are different markets, different kind of people, different kind of governments, different kind of approaches. Well, commenting on one of them would not be doing justice to the other one. Therefore, yes. So one thing that can be done is to reduce the gap between supply and demand. And in doing so, in order to bring in more clean energy services to the agri sector, we need to also empower the farmer themselves to know about the usage and the benefits of the clean energies, right? And for example, solar water pumping system. They can just quickly install a PV system and they can unlock the water from the underground directly for the irrigation system, which is, of course, clean, and it is less pollution, and it is more better for the environment and for long-term sustainability of the planet as well as the project. And in doing so, we need to also look at the demand side of the project. And in order to stimulate that demand, we need to, I agree with Jonathan that we need to do more technical assistance and capacity building at the local level, where we need to let them know that, okay, these are the projects, these are the technologies that can help you decrease the time that you need to go fetch the water, or after harvesting, go to the nearby city to process the produce, that you can do it at your doorstep with the implementation of DRE tech. So that to bridge the gap between supply and demand, and also to look at stimulating the demand size. Also, project ticket size is something that comes to my mind that is kind of a hindrance, that the investors are not very much interested to look into such projects because they are very small in size. So one idea here would be to make combined proposals by clustering together several projects, making it to a scale where it is, let's say, at the same level of a big project for attracting the attention from the investors, to see how we can bring in the finances there, and to show them the test cases by showing the results of a successful prototypes or successful pilot projects. And this way, I see that we can gain more attention and increase the traction from the investor side, then from the people, the user side. And this way, I guess we can, let's say, if not strike a balance, but let's say can move or step forward in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I'm very struck by the idea of bringing together small projects in order to have a big, impactful project to be able to attract the financing to move that project forward. Thank you so much, Deepak. Tanya, I wanna bring you back to the conversation by giving you the opportunity to answer our third question first. And our question is, what can be done to increase the speed and scale of delivering on the above investments that have been talked about in question 1 and 2?
Thanks, Pasi, and also thanks for the quote that you shared before, making us think again about the customers first. So I would actually like to start with that. So I think it's been mentioned that this sector is really early. The food energy nexus is still not well understood. It's still early. And I think one of the reasons for that is that most of the lenders or investors are either looking at it purely from an agriculture lens or purely from an energy lens. And this is not just true for the investors, it's also true for the implementers or innovations or organizations working on these solutions. So they're either looking at it purely from an agriculture supply chain perspective or purely from an energy perspective. So I think, first of all, the first thing that needs to be done is both of these lenses need to be married. So investors need to, and like any organization working in both of these sectors, need to be open to understanding the customer perspective first. So I think one of the examples of this would be that while we're focusing a lot on demand generation for making mini grids viable, are we really understanding what the customer requirements are before they even need that level of demand? So for a customer to invest in, or for a farmer to invest in cold storage, do they even have normal just regular warehouses or storage for their grains, and then they will move on to higher value crops which need cold storage? Just a small example. So I guess just thinking through the whole system or the whole ecosystem challenges, and thinking through what levels of needs the customer has before they can even access productive energy will help overall the sector to move forward faster. So that is one. I think the second is again on very similar lines, more collaborations across different investor segments. And I think this has been touched upon before, and how public and private capital can come together. But I think again in this sector lens, and being able to think beyond your specific mandate and being flexible with the way you deploy your capital. So for example, if so grant providers not being just married to the idea that they have to provide grant to early stage enterprises, but being willing to test new approaches in collaboration with debt providers and equity providers as well, and vice versa for lenders to be able to more easily work across. So I guess just breaking these barriers of understanding how other organizations operate and work and deploy their funding, and still being able to identify common solutions to work together. So the second would be that. And I think the third is also because there are so many external changes happening now. Like, so COVID was one good example of that. Not good example, but one unfortunate example, which kind of catalyzed a lot of good innovations, but it also, I think, kind of made organizations step back and slow down and relook at their strategies. So while a lot of organizations pivoted their investment mandate due to COVID and kind of deployed it just for the emergency support, I also think there needs to be a long-term thinking in how you change your strategies completely, but you still keep your focus on the long-term goals of creating impact for the customer. So I guess just staying sustainably focused on your existing program mandates while incorporating external changes, and not necessarily getting derailed by every external change that happens, to be able to deploy capital sustainably. And I think this is true for a lot of the public sector programs which have completely shifted their priorities or completely changed their priorities post-COVID. So I think just sustainability of existing mandates also needs to be taken into account. I think this is on the collaboration point. I think just also wanted to touch very briefly upon the earlier question on the balance between public and private sector funding. So there, again, I think there are different roles that different kinds of capital can play at different points. And there's just one mapping that we tried to do. So as Jonathan mentioned, this needs to be done this needs to be thought through at a country level. We also think it needs to be thought through at a product or at an innovation or a value chain level. So we did this mapping for biodigesters specifically last year, and I think the results are kind of quite replicable across maybe other productive assets as well, as in what capital is required at which stage for the technology to scale. And I'll share the link of that report in the chat.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I think when you're speaking, it kind of brought me back to something that is happening in Kenya locally, which is where I am based. For the longest time, electricity costs have been so high, and we have seen a rapid transition by big tea companies and flower farms shifting into solar to produce their own power, just so that also their products can sell at the end of the day, so that they don't have to increase the cost of their products because of a high cost of power. So this is a transition that's happening at the local level. So when I was just listening to you, I just thought to share this quick transition that's happening, especially with tea and flower factories that also fall under the food system sector if you think about tea and agriculture. But I wanna give an opportunity to you, Rim, to just answer the third question. What do you think needs to be done to increase the speed and scale of delivering investments for the food and energy sectors, or nexus rather?
Sure. I'd like to mention maybe one thing that we have touched upon, but haven't spent too much time talking about, which is, how much a straightforward national policy and regulation is key for scale and speed, as well as its stability, and that is very important. We need policies that we can rely on, so that are trustworthy, but that also don't change every morning. And I think that we have been struggling in some countries with changes of regulations that were quite erratic, that not necessarily were, following, that were highly political, let's say it that way, and we're not necessarily, promoting a long-term investment in the agri-energy nexus. We have, a lot of countries in the continent specifically have been achieving really top-notch energy policies, as well as agriculture stimulus and so on. But again, we haven't seen the combination of the two happening. I'd just like to give an example on, import duties, for example. In a lot of countries, you have tax-free regimes for for renewable energy products, in others for agricultural products, but the combination of the two doesn't exist. So a lot of the time, importers of those goods find themselves in this weird position where they have access to tax benefits if it's declared under agri-product and not if it's a renewable energy product. So we also need, to a lot of extent, the ministries of agriculture to speak to the ministries as well as the Ministry of Finance in a lot of the countries to build frameworks that are comprehensive. So that's for me one of the key points to achieve scale and speed. The second point is really going back to some of the comments around pilots and landmark transactions. I think that builds traction for private investors when they see that projects have been successful, and Santander to a lot of extent have been investing or lending to projects that were pilots to sort of hopefully try to lead the way and show that it is possible to a lot of our peers. So that is the second for me. Even if it's small transactions, and we know that in agriculture, project sizes we've mentioned that are relatively small, but it still needs to happen because that will drive scale and growth. And the third point is everything we've been talking about, blended finance. Tools that can, and again, as Deepak was saying, one size doesn't fit all. So there's going to be different solutions for different projects. It can be grant for some, it can be RBF for others, it can be guarantees for some, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we have the tools. We just need a framework to apply the right tool for the right country and for the right subsegment. And Tanya, the roadmap that you've done would be super interesting to look at and sort of replicate in other productive uses segments and see how we can apply it to each country and reality and so on. So yeah, that was it from my side.
Thank you so much, Rim. I guess what I'm hearing from you is that there is an opportunity to collaborate at various levels and an opportunity to test different best practices that are happening in different spaces and to be able to legitimize whether this solution works for this solution for a different project. So thank you so much for that. I'm fumbling a little bit because we're running out of time. I felt like, we didn't get enough time to go around. We have about 6 minutes left, and maybe I just want to give an opportunity to you all to maybe take advantage of the few minutes to just give your final words, your final thoughts, final reflections on the theme of the day, and even just some of the things that we might have not covered. So I'll give you each about 1.5 minutes each to just give your final word, and I'll start with you, Jonathan.
Okay, great. This is thanks for leading us, Passy. So I guess I'll go back to where we were with how do we speed this up. I think, and this has been echoed quite a bit, I think we need pilots or more test cases. We need to have more learning going on. We needed the pointy-headed researchers in the room gathering, doing impact evaluations of pilots. And we need to understand sort of the secret sauce to why some projects work in some places and why they don't, because this is the phase that we're in right now. I guess, and then building on Rim's point about policy, I think she sort of the implications of this, but it can start even at the highest levels. And back to Ethiopia, because I've been working there, their plan on the energy side and kind of integrating the ag sector in some ways is very clear. They've said, we want to use Minigrids to reach these certain segments of the population, and their targets for those areas that will power productive loads like agriculture, irrigation, and processing. And I think that really clear signal in the way that they implemented it has organized stakeholders and really aligned the planning so that one agency can help the sites, the intervention service, and then another agency can figure out the regulatory and tariff questions, and the private sector sort of knows where to go and who to talk to. I think all of that is really important. And then just the last point is, you know, the North Star of what I think is climate finance for adaptation. That's really what we're talking about here. I think I was in the DFI world before I came to Duke, and absolutely financing these types of projects, but the sector isn't ready. As Deepak alluded to, you know, too many small one-off transactions with varying risk profiles. That's not the kind of stuff that lends to the ticket sizes that DFI under. So the longer-term plan, I think, fund managers that can, you know, capable of doing due diligence on multiple of individual projects. And then I think we'll be able to kind of bring in some of the larger scale capital. But I think right now we're still figuring out business stuff, and that's fine, but we need to learn fast. I'll leave it there.
And now I see we have just 2 minutes, so now it's reduced to 30 seconds for final words. So Deepak, your final words.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, all in all, that objective boils down to decarbonizing the agri sector, because it is one of the most polluting sector in the whole world right now. And energy, the DRE sector, the decentralized renewable energy, has the potential to make that happen, to enable that. Therefore, from the ARE side, the only recommendation that I can put forward today is to follow more inclusive and collective work approach to see what is working and what is not, collect as much data and assess them as much as possible, and make the data sharing more feasible and more easier. And effective policies and regulations at every country level will make things better, of course. And for financial and institutional sustainability, the more, just to reiterate my point, the more pilots we have, the more success cases we will get to know about. The more cases we will know about, the more trust of the investors that we can gain. And in doing so, we will have more funding channeled to the sector. I would rest my case today here at this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepak. Wim, your final words.
Sure. Thanks, Pasi, and thanks, everyone. This has been a great conversation. From our standpoint, being a debt provider to the space, would love to see more collaboration between public and private sector as a whole at the local level, really, because that's the only thing that works, even if there are high-level frameworks, but every single country has its own reality. So that's one for us. The second point is not being ashamed of blended finance at this stage of the development of the sector. Trying to adapt the tool to every project and for whatever makes sense. And the third point, which is modestly what some funder at our scale we can do, is to continue to do those pilots and hopefully talk about it in these forums and see how we can bring other into the loop to make it even bigger. That would be it for me.
Thank you, Rim. And finally, Tanya, you have the very, very good.
Thank you so much, Pasi, and thank you, everyone. It's been a great learning experience talking to all of you. I think just very quickly summarizing what everybody said and what I think the message is that we need to take more risks. I think organizations need to be willing to take more risks and do more pilots, and then more importantly, share what worked, but also more importantly, what didn't work, because we see a lot of different replication also happening of projects or initiatives that might have failed but weren't shared openly, and so we can save some of that time, like and move forward in the learning curve for the sector as a whole on which kind of partnerships are working and which aren't. So
thank you so much, Tanya, and all of you for their lively discussion. We are late for our plenary sessions. I'll adjust to leave and go there, but I'll finally just close by saying that there are also amazing projects that are being done by youth and women groups in various local locations. I think having a focus on that would be nice, and I see your colleague has shared a link on the chat box for you all to refer to. Thank you so much, and see you in the plenary session. Bye-bye.
Welcome back, everyone, to the plenary room. I see the numbers going up. I think we're still missing one of our breakout rooms, but while they're wrapping up, I would like to invite our moderators. Pasi is already here and Magdalena is already here to give us their findings. Thank you, ladies. The floor is yours.
So I was moderating the investment and partnership breakout session, and we had an incredible panel there. And I just want to say thank you to Jonathan, Tanya, Deepak, and Reem once again for a very lovely discussion on investments. Ana Lucia, just in terms of some of the takeaways from that session, I think for lack of adequate time, I mean, there were so many things that were said, but I want to just give you a few of the takeaways. I mean, it was very clear that there is a need to de-risk some of the projects by addressing the demand challenge, and also being able to identify the demand shift, and this is in terms of energy and the energy transition. So that came out very, very clearly. It was also very agreed upon that there is need to identify customers' needs at all levels so as to be able to know what kind of projects would benefit them, especially at the local level. There was also a strong call for collaborating, especially between public and private partnerships in terms of financing schemes that are available out there. So there was a very strong push that these two sectors need to actively collaborate as a whole. When it comes to the examples of public and private financing schemes for the food and energy nexus, I mean, all the panelists agreed that there is no simple way of answering or of showcasing those examples. And also, I think a very important point was the fact that examples that might have worked in other spaces might not exactly work in other spaces. So there was a very strong push for a blended financing, scheme or perspective to financing some of the projects that happen between the food and energy nexus, instead of just focusing on one. And there are various examples that were given from grants to equity to lending, and the role of subsidies, for example, and even conversations around import duties and tax, and some people who have tax benefits, especially when it comes to, heavy tax that have been placed on mini-grids, for example, that are coming in vis-a-vis, taxes that come through the agricultural sector. Without taking too much time, I think also there was a strong point towards the end of our panel where the need for policies that can be relied on, especially when it comes to the regulation of these sectors, and also the stability of these sectors was very, very key. And I think also a very strong point that came out from the policy aspect of things was that there is a need, especially from the public sector, for ministries to collaborate with each other to be able to finance the food and energy nexus. So this is bringing in collaboration between ministries of energy, ministries of agriculture, and ministries of finance, as opposed to them working in isolation for each other. And then finally, the need, there's very strong need to focus on pilot projects as a way of learning and taking up and testing best practices, especially when it comes to investments, and also pilots as a means of identifying collaboration, attracting investments, and being able to have projects that are sustainable in nature. And last but not least is the strong need for training, learning, and capacity building, especially at the local level, so that people begin to understand and appreciate what goes into financing, what goes into partnership, and how to link together two sectors that for a very long time have lived in silos, but now have to come together for the benefit of people, businesses, farmers, and customers, especially in developing countries. Thank you so much, and that is my feedback.
Thank you very much, Pasi. I think we can have the next session. The next moderator give us the perspective. Probably it will be good to complement with the country perspectives and then the global perspectives.
Okay, so you want me to go ahead?
Yes, Oliver, that would be fantastic.
So again, fantastic discussion, very good panelists, very experienced people. I mean, we will need 2 hours at least to make a good discussion here. Anyway, trying to summarize barriers in different countries, not to repeat what was already said. There's a disconnect in terms of financial institutions. They fund either energy or they fund food aspects. They don't fund both. So you don't have a products that finance the whole energy food chain interaction and links. One thing which came up interestingly is that sometimes the lenders, they or the financing institutions, they want to see the numbers. So of course, if you finance cook stoves, household stuff, cook stoves or solar home systems, you have many more people using them than if you finance a mill. So, and then we have more chances to finance individual household stuff than food chain stuff. And so there's a problem in there. The other one is the lack of information about the dynamics of the demand, the profile of the demand for energy, especially in food chains and rural areas. And the usual stuff that came, the links between the knowledge about energy, appliance, raising awareness on both, and what is productive use it means in terms of exactly demand I was mentioning before. Possible solutions we're mentioning in terms of the demand, knowing the demand, some studies, some surveys, know better the demand, but also some innovations like digital technology, smart sensoring for mills, for example, about energy consumption, aggregating demand through farmer groups and what we call the anchor business community model. The problem there is that you need to have money to fund all these types of customers, and this is a problem. Often when the microfinance accepts to fund, they say we need standards. So we may have standards for some equipment, but not for other equipment, energy equipment, but not for appliances. And so that's a deterrent because it's a risk to finance non-standardized equipment. Linking payments to the dynamics of revenues in food chains. For example, harvest time is good for farmers to pay instead of having to pay every month, for example. The dynamics of repayments should be tailored to the dynamics of the revenues in the food chains. Going to the scaling up question, mapping the best locations for investing in renewable energy, for example, is interesting, where you have potential for improving the yields, for example, or productive uses, but you don't have electricity. Locating those could help in terms of good opportunities for investing. But also the problem of the local currency investment, and also more generally involving local financial institutions. So international financial institutions should partner with local to have this peer-to-peer learning, which is very useful in terms of repair hubs where people can go to have their services for their appliances. All sorts of problems with appliances that need to be sorted out. So the energy people need to get out of their box and to go more to the appliance box also, and the customer box. Incentives to work in rural areas, not instead of urban areas. And finally, on the midterm, maybe education, because, for example, agronomy curricula do not have anything or very little on green energy. And so educating people who work on food chains to also have some knowledge on energy, but also maybe involving people who are already involved in servicing farmers and food chain actors. You just add the energy bit there, but then you have to be careful with what type of people are already working, that they have to have the trust of the farmers. I probably missed a lot of things here, but okay, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. No, I think you covered, I've been covering the three groups. It was really interactive, interesting. At the end, I think after we hear from the three groups, I can also highlight some of the points that came across that I captured overall, specifically those linked to finance and investment. But let's first hear from Juliette.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So we also had a very good discussion in the global perspective group. I'll also try to summarize the key ideas shared by the panelists. So the first question was really on partnership and the fact that partnerships provided blended support, combining technical assistance, grants, loans, equity, are really critical and can really graduate ideas into bankable investment and scalable projects. Partnerships should be able to develop and catalyze innovative ideas, especially in high-risk environments. And partnerships can actually cover the high-risk part of capital that should be invested. We had two representatives from the DFCD, the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, and the GCF, which are consortium of investors and stakeholders. We can really play that role and bring stakeholders together and invest in the higher risk part of capital. The complexity within partnerships that was highlighted is that the partners have different mandates, and they need to communicate effectively and understand each other, even though they do not have always the same objectives or interests. And also, as already said, partnerships should focus more on the demand side and the customer side of things, which is currently a black box. And there is a mismatch between supply and demand understanding. The second question was really on this balance between public and private finance. We all recognize that this is a tricky question, and there is no specific ratio or ideal ratio. This is very context specific, depending on the country fragility, the economic development, etc. Unlocking private finance and de-risking investment is really should be the role of public finance. The GCF has played this role of taking the risk and providing technical assistance to attract other partners and other stakeholders like impact funds, multilateral funds, etc. We also discuss the fact that this balance between public and private follows the project cycle and the project evolution. So at the beginning, it is about de-risking by proving what is possible. So that's the R&D stage, just proving if things work. The second would be de-risking by doing and just building the project, collecting data, and this is really where grant funding makes sense. And the third step or the third stage is really moving forward to the market dynamics. And public finance should really be there to fill the gaps, and we need to look at what the gaps are and do a complete assessment of the market, have a holistic approach, and make sure the public finance meet these this approach. And one interesting remark was really on the large programs such as the GCF or Powering Africa, conveying public finance. They really should also focus on the small scale side of things and the demand side. We can observe sometimes a mismatch between finance and small scale projects, and there is a need for connecting organization and link both large public finance and small scale needs. Lastly, just on scale-up plans to attract investors, we all agreed on we first need to know what works through small projects or pilots and see to what extent they are scalable and replicable. Those small projects can also foster innovative approaches based on lessons learned and evidence-based evidence collected during the pilot phases, and scale up and potential to replicate are definitely criteria for investment framework of large programs such as the GCF. Lastly, as already said, policy, regulation, and appropriate policy framework are absolutely essential to match the needs, and otherwise scale-up will not happen. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to all the moderators for capturing so well all the interesting discussions that came out from the various groups. And I think just to maybe emphasize the point that Juliette made around the small scale needs, in reality, we're talking about business models which are SME-led business models. And the SMEs, as we know, have challenges in accessing finance. In this case, we're talking about green business models, which have twice as many challenges, if not even 3 times as many challenges, if we also try to put the gender dimension, and we also want to see some of the women-led business models in energy. So 3 times excluded the target groups is what we're trying to address here. And there was a lot of good discussion in the groups around the smart use of subsidy. Somebody was saying we should stop questioning the need for subsidy and stop asking when exactly the energy access sector would be moving away from subsidy. This is not the question. The question is about targeted smart use of subsidy to address these vulnerabilities, to scale these business models, and to basically allow for this prototyping effect to take place. In another of the groups, what I heard was also be aware of financial instruments, be aware of concessional finance and credit lines, which is available to the sector, available, for instance, for mini-grid development, available for productive use, dedicated credit lines, which are available through local financial institutions, are not being used. Dedicated financial instruments, guarantee schemes, while existing, are not being utilized. And the reasons for this is it's not just about availability of the instrument, it is about availability of projects that are investable, it is about green capacities in the local institutions to be able to work with such instruments. And addressing these gaps requires coordination. A lot of the groups talked about various studies, various pilots, lots of knowledge, experience available, but also recognizing that too many uncoordinated consultancies and reports out there, and when we need more evidence around demand, we also need much more coordination so that this evidence is actually shared and there is this scale-up approach which is coming out of it. So we see some of this financing flowing to the sector. And probably the final point is there is a recognition that we are in the beginning of this journey. The financing continue in the clean energy value chain, specifically when it comes to productive use in food systems, which was illustrated by my colleague when we started from the grants and moving up the chain, trying to do some of the most sophisticated financial instruments, whether these are guarantees, whether it's equity, quasi-equity investments or commercial investments, whether it's a securitization or cluster clustering, aggregation, and various other financial innovations. These are very important, but we are in the beginning of this journey, and we need to be aware as to where exactly we are and what the needs are at this point of time. So the point that Oliver made about education and more emphasis, and I believe, Pasi, you made the same point, more emphasis on creating this demand and creating the demand within the communities themselves, so that we have a bottom-up approach. That's hugely important point. As supply might be there, capital is there. Capital is coming from both international and national sources increasingly. However, if the demand is not there, we'll continue seeing the gap between demand and supply. I really thank you very much. This was such an interesting discussion. It actually went beyond financing and investment. It really touched upon so many other points, and it just shows that it can't be just financing and investment. We need to address the other aspects of the ecosystem if we are to move forward on this journey. Thank you so much for everybody. I wish everybody a great day. I don't know from UNIDO's colleague if you want to come in at the end.
Yes, thank you, Magdalena. Well, I just want to echo what you just said. Thank you very much to our moderators for condensing these very comprehensive discussions, and to the speakers and the participants. It was great to connect with you once again. So have a great day, and don't forget that we have another VEF Virtual Series focusing on industry next Wednesday. So make sure to come back with us, and wishing you all a great day. Thank you for joining.